Ladies and gentlemen, it is here. It is here, son. Man, let me tell you something. DCeased is back. And son. Tom Taylor starts us off with a bang. Okay, here's the thing, right? DCeased is finally back. Superman returns in this story, thank God, right? So we get to see whatever came of like zombie Superman, which is gonna be awesome. Not a spoiler, because a ton of other stuff happens here. But here's the kicker. As you guys know, DCeased is a monthly release, which means we cover this one today. We don't cover the next one until like September, like late September 20th. And then we gotta wait till the end of October and so on and so forth, right? It comes out once a month. I still say they should have released these as an original graphic novel. Having said that, this story is amazing, right? So what this does, and it's actually one of the coolest things, what this does is it opens up on Krypton with the city of Kandor and the origin of Supergirl. Remember, Supergirl's a character that we haven't seen yet in DCeased. Like, we have not seen her yet. And it's one of the cool things, because the more I read DCeased, the more I think it kind of feels like injustice in terms of all of Tom Taylor's world building. And so what we end up getting here is Supergirl basically being sent away from Krypton by her family, and instead of arriving on Earth, she travels somewhere else. Now, all of this is really being given to us by way of, like, literally Brainiac showing up here, Krypton's imminent end, its destruction, all that kind of stuff, what you normally expect from the origin of Supergirl. But here's the cool thing, right? Here's the funny thing that happens. So the statement that's made by her family, by her parents is this: it will take many years for you to reach your new home, daughter. Though Krypton will be long gone, to you, it will seem like no time has passed. We have searched throughout the universe, and we have found a planet. When you reach this world, you will have incredible abilities, but you will not be alone in this. There will be others on this world with fantastic powers. You will be special, but not apart. And when she arrives here, the statement her parents make is, we are sending you to New Genesis. Jor-El would send his son to live with primitives. We are sending you to live with gods. The crazy thing about this is when she arrives on New Genesis, everybody's infected with the anti-life virus. Remember, like, literally, Darkseid went nuts. He was the first to truly be infected outside of like Cyborg, but he was the first being to truly be infected and then seemingly went on a warpath. New Genesis was hit by that, which means Highfather and all these new gods that exist out there in DC Comics, they're all zombified, if we want to use that phrase, right? But they're all basically, they're infected with the anti-life virus now. For those of you guys coming from Marvel Comics and you're not necessarily sure what all this means, imagine that like a being like Galactus was infected with the anti-life virus and it was like a planet of Galactuses, and that's what you're looking at, right? That's the kind of thing you're looking at, like the kind of mid-level cosmic entities. So let's say somebody like Mephisto and Thanos and Galactus and these guys, that's the level of power that we're talking about here. It's pretty intense. Now, I use those comparisons as more of like a contextual thing. So before some of you guys get in the comments and you're like, nerp-de-derp-derp-derp, actually, Thanos is not as powerful as Highfather derp-de-derp. I'm not making a power comparison. I'm simply just saying that like these guys are, at least in terms of the role they play, they're comparable. But the thing about this is where Supergirl initially flees for her life, one thing to remember is that the new gods are in a lot of ways on her same level of power. And so she is seemingly immediately overtaken by these guys and then infected by the virus. So quite literally, she arrives on this world and then basically dies. And so following that, what you end up doing is, of course, you kind of get a little bit of an explanation from Tom Taylor insofar as where things stand, which is to say that yes, there was the anti-life virus that broke out on Earth, but they ultimately discovered a cure. So while not every single person across the world is cured, most are, and they're still curing a ton every day. But lest we forget, there is basically the superheroes who exist here on Earth, but one of the things you remember is at the end of the first DCeased comic, a bunch of the heroes escaped Earth. They took off, right? They literally got in spaceships and left. They're gone. So there are some superheroes who are still here, but a lot of the ones that we know have basically taken off. And so what we end up doing here is, of course, switching over to the ones who are here, right? So you have Damian Wayne, who's the new Batman, you have Jonathan Kent, who's the new Superman, so on and so forth. And what they're trying to figure out is what they're going to do. Initially, Jonathan's like, now that we have a cure, it's time to go find my dad. It's time to go find Superman and to basically save him. You know, the other part of this is Damian just being like, I could come with you, right? Like I could join you on this. And it's kind of a funny banter back and forth because Jonathan's whole thing is like, I mean, it's the center of the sun, Damian. I doubt Batman has the ability ability or any technology, I doubt that Bruce had anything that would allow him to enter the center of the sun. Now, as we know from Batman comics, the fact that Batman is literally, this guy can just reach into his pocket and have whatever he needs at any point in time in order to defeat somebody because prep time or something like that. He probably did, but it's still a funny thing. What's really cool about this though, and this is one of the things that I love about Tom Taylor. Tom Taylor's great when it comes to developing interpersonal relationships in what is in effect a post-apocalyptic story, right? Like Injustice kind of felt post-apocalyptic to a degree insofar as the heroes as we knew them versus the heroes as they exist now. And then of course, like DCeased is absolutely a post-apocalyptic story where society's kind of rebuilding itself. But the relationship between Jonathan and Damian has largely been maintained. These guys know each other just as well as they ever did, and they've become some of the best of friends that you could possibly imagine. So it's no wonder why it is that Jonathan is not in any rush to let Damian join him in the center of the sun, not necessarily even knowing if Damian can survive. But at the end of the day, the decision is made, right? Because of the fact that this is essentially Superman, and because this is Superman who spent the last 5 years at the center of the sun. Remember, when the whole DCeased thing first ended up happening, when it first popped off, towards the end of the story, Superman was infected. He ended up being infected by the anti-life virus. And when the heroes were trying to escape, those who managed to get away from Earth, when they were trying to take off, they were initially being attacked. Ultimately, Superman was momentarily held off and then ended up basically walking away, right? Ended up flying into the sun to basically charge himself with solar energy, and has been doing so for the last 5 years. And that's what's kind of crazy, is because when the heaviest hitters who were here on Earth get to the sun and they get to where Superman is, one, of course, they have the cure, but two, they didn't realize how radically things had changed. That when Jonathan is told by Green Canary, right, when basically Dinah Lance, Black Canary, following the death of Hal Jordan, she basically ended up becoming the new Green Lantern, that when this happened, that she tells him, that's not your father in there, Jonathan. That's something that you have to keep in mind. That's not your dad. That is an infected guy. So while the goal is to cure him, if it comes down to the fact that we can't, we may have to kill him. And that has to be something that you can be okay with. And while Jonathan doesn't necessarily say that he is, at the end of the day, he has to be. There's no alternative here. Either Superman gets cured or Superman has to die. And so entering into the sun, what Jonathan and really the others failed to take into account, or maybe just hadn't really been able to understand the full gravity of, is how powerful Superman would become, sitting in the core of the sun for 5 straight years, absorbing all of its solar energy. Like just standing there, absorbing solar energy, right? I mean, Superman is powered by solar energy. So he's faster and stronger than anybody could have ever imagined, and faster and stronger than he's ever been in his existence. A perfect example of this is that Green Canary literally creates a hard-like construct to encase Superman. And Tom Taylor kind of plays with this idea in saying that under any normal circumstance, this would have held him. Under any normal circumstance, Superman would have been encased and he wouldn't have been able to get away. He shattered it in an instant, right? Just like literally just broke it like glass. Now, with enough time, normal Superman probably would have been able to escape, but that's one of the things to know about Tom Taylor's writing. His depiction of characters from one story to the next outside of DC's continuity really changes. So Superman during Injustice, for example, was stupidly overpowered. I mean, it was nuts how powerful he was. And some would actually argue it was the most accurate depiction of Superman's strength that's been done in DC Comics for quite some time, which, if I'm being honest, I'm kind of inclined to agree with. Others would say he was just wildly overpowered for the sake of the story. So that's why Tom Taylor's writing, when it comes to characters, you can't necessarily take their strength levels as he depicts them as an absolute truth. It's just one of many variations. That's why we kind of have a main DC universe and just a baseline that exists out there. But the thing about this is that it literally takes all these guys to try to step in and do something. And they're literally trying to hold Superman off as best they can. But we never actually find out, or at least we don't find out here, what happens. All we know is they seemingly have him held in place, and then basically like Green Canary is like, now, right? Like Cyborg, inject him. And so what you end up doing is jumping to Earth 2 days later. And this is cool because what it basically says is like, this is where the other heroes had gone off to, right? They had basically formed kind of a new world for themselves, a new Earth. And that's one of the things to know, that it happened right at the end of the main DC series, that the heroes found a new place to live. When they arrive here, of course, you've got President Lane, right? Lois Lane, who's basically acting president. You've got Guy Gardner, you've got John Stewart, the Green Lanterns that we're usually familiar with. But while they're here, suddenly they're met by the arrival, or at least the energy signature of an apocalyptic force, which of course turns out to be a boom tube. But as soon as this opens, their first thought is like, we're under attack, right? Like everybody respond. But the thing about this is that once the tube opens, it's actually the good guys. Not only is it the good guys, it's this really beautiful and amazing moment, because you basically get like Superman who shows up, who's been essentially cured, right? Not only that, when his arm was ripped off before, it's been replaced by a new arm, which is really, really awesome. So of course, Lois Lane is very excited to see her man. But then the other part of this, and this is probably one of the more beautiful moments here, is that Jonathan Kent was also cured, like the actual Jonathan Kent, right? Like Superman's dad. So now you have like, you have like the entire family essentially reunited, right? Jonathan and Martha are reunited. The Superman and Lois are reunited. It's a very beautiful moment here. Not only that, where you do have, you have Big Barda and you've got Scott Free. Of course, they're cured again, and their intention is to go back home to basically New Genesis, or at least to Apocalypse or what have you, and to find their son wherever it is that he may be. Because one of the things to remember is that that entire area is in a complete and total state of chaos. And because it's in a state of chaos, they don't know exactly where their son is. All they can do is just go to that realm and hope that they can somehow find him. Now, they don't know that everything's bad, but the crazy thing here, and what's really also a bit of torment, is you switch over to Damian talking to Alfred and actually revealing everything to Alfred insofar as they have a cure and all that kind of stuff. Now, the thing about this is Alfred would have found out eventually. And so it was really the responsibility of Damian to say to Alfred, there is a cure for the anti-life virus. We can bring everybody back. The bigger reason why Alfred is so tortured by this is because if you remember in the original DCeased event, when Bruce Wayne was infected, nobody knew what it was. And Alfred had to kill Bruce Wayne, and he had to kill Tim Drake and Dick Grayson. He literally killed them all with a shotgun. So they're dead. They're not infected, just kind of roaming around out there. They had to die. And that's the thing. Alfred takes it as a massive personal loss. And the truth from what Damian says is, you would have found out about this, and so it's my responsibility to tell you, but there's no way you could have known what would have happened. There's no way you could have known that there would have been a cure developed for this. All we knew is that all these different superheroes, these beings out there, were infected by some kind of zombified virus, and they would have killed everybody they could find or infect everybody they could find. You did what you thought was the right thing at that point in time. But Alfred still rejects that and says like, no, I killed my sons, right? And so it's one of those things where as a father figure, he just can't let that go. He just can't walk away from this. And so what you do is you switch over to what is in effect about the next day, and you have all these Brainiac probes that end up arriving and basically showing up to Earth 2. Now, initially they're taken out by like Superman and Jessica Cruz, one of the other Green Lanterns, and so on and so forth, right? The Green Lantern Corps itself responds as you would expect. And so these probes are kind of annihilated because their first thought is, okay, one, these probes are a credible threat because each one of these guys are very capable, but two, Brainiac probes mean Brainiac's arrival is imminent, and he literally shows up hours later. Now, here's the crazy thing. Once they get to the Brainiac vessel, they start to realize that like something's wrong. The ship's in ragtag condition. It looks like it's basically limping along by all standards of measurement. This Brainiac ship looks like a car that's falling apart and is out of gas and is literally just kind of limping along the highway until it just stops. That's basically what this looks like. It's just in a dilapidated condition, and Brainiac is nothing if not meticulous. And so this idea of his ship just being torn asunder and in little bits and pieces is concern for everybody, because the thought of Superman, or at least the thought of John Stewart is, Superman, can you see inside, right? Can you use your X-ray vision to see? And his response is no. That was one of the first things Brainiac did when he developed his ship, was to design it in such a way to where I can't see inside, anybody with X-ray vision can't see inside, to minimize any weaknesses that this vessel may have. So the only alternative they have is to go in, right? Literally, Guy Gardner's like, we have to go in there. Like, we've got to get inside this ship and we have to see what's going on, which means we may find ourselves in a face-to-face confrontation with Brainiac. Now, where Superman tells Jonathan, I'm going in, you have to wait here, this is Superman not necessarily realizing how far his son has come. Jonathan has been through a lot, and he's experienced a lot and grown up much faster than Superman possibly could have imagined. Of course, because Superman was zombified and he was in the sun, no way he could have known. But this is not one of those instances when Jonathan stays behind, and he even says that, I'm not staying here. And so at the end of the day, it's Jonathan and Superman who enter into the ship, and when they get in there, what they find is that Brainiac is no longer a threat. Instead, like, his body's been ripped in half. He's just kind of hanging there, just sort of strung up, and he's like, we have to stop him. The gods are dead, but they still come, Kal-El. They will poison the universe, and the gods will end everything. All right, what's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are back with DCeased War of the Undead Gods Part 2, the second part of the final chapter of the DCeased story. As always, if you guys are new to the channel, make sure you guys check out the playlist down in the description so you can get caught up. So here's the thing. In the last video, we basically talked about how, in effect, the anti-life virus, which is sort of a stand-in for a zombie virus to a degree, that it had basically been cured, right? And the efforts of the superheroes, or at least what's left of the superheroes, was to travel across the universe and cure pretty much any of the places that have been infected. But they don't know that, like, Darkseid is back, right? He's still infected with the anti-life virus, and so on and so forth. So one of the things that happens, right, this initially focuses on Scott-Free and Big Barda, right? Mr. Miracle. Now, for those of you guys who don't know, these guys are what are called new gods. So the reality here is that these folks are wildly powerful. Something to know about when it comes to new gods is they are all on, in some way, equivalent to like Superman, Wonder Woman, those guys in terms of power. They're all hugely powerful, right? They're not exactly equal, and it kind of varies depending on one person to the next, but like Scott-Free, for example, can break out of any prison no matter what it is, anywhere in the universe, and Big Barda, well, she's just big and she's badass, right? That's basically what that is. But the idea behind this is that they had a son, and when the initial virus went off, their son was basically taken to New Genesis, which is the home of the new gods, in order to basically keep him safe, right? What better place to keep him away from the entire apocalypse than a place that can only be accessed by those with godly powers, and a place that is a home to godly beings that are easily able to overcome virtually any force within the realm of DC Comics. And so as a result of that, once they end up getting back there, one of the things that we saw in the last video, right at the end of the last video, was the story of Supergirl, who was just now being introduced to the story. Remember, like, the whole idea of DCeased takes place in an alternate reality. And so what we found out with Supergirl is, unlike the main DC universe where her origin sees her arriving on Earth, instead, she arrived on New Genesis. Not only that, Apocalypse had attacked New Genesis and basically turned virtually everybody there into one of his anti-life forces, right? Kind of like a zombie, so to speak. And so as soon as Supergirl arrived, she was immediately attacked and converted. And so once Scott-Free and Big Barda arrive here, not realizing what's going on, they immediately find that New Genesis has fallen, right? The new gods have basically fallen. They don't really know exactly what's going on. They just know that things are really bad, but their immediate concern is to look for their son. And then noticing a dark portal off to the side, Big Barda initially goes to enter and is stopped by the Black Racer. Now, for those of you guys who aren't familiar with the Black Racer in DC Comics, it's one of the many allegories of death in DC, that the Black Racer is just kind of this personification of the Grim Reaper to a degree. He's really the most popular version of the Grim Reaper, but different personifications or aspects of death exist out there. But by and large, whenever the Black Racer appears, it is a being that simply cannot be outran, with the exception of like Barry Allen the Flash, and like that's it. And the result of this is that when it comes to the Black Racer showing up here, it actually rescues Big Barda. Now, the reason why this matters is because the Black Racer, despite the fact that it is the Grim Reaper, it can be killed. If you are powerful enough, you can destroy the Black Racer. The reason why this matters is because with the fall of New Genesis, the Black Racer is just one of the survivors. And literally, it tells them Darkseid is back. Darkseid is the unliving god. Darkseid is the one who is controlling the entirety of all these forces with the anti-life virus. He attacked New Genesis, he's bolstering his army, and it's going to spread across the entirety of the universe unless we can find some way to stop it. And so the first thing that Darkseid does, right after destroying New Genesis and taking it over, bolstering his army with the power of the new gods, the first main world that exists out there in the universe that doesn't belong to any of the gods, the first one they attack is Kruger. Now, for those of you guys who are familiar with DC Comics, bear with me here for a second. For those of you guys who aren't, Kruger is the home planet of Thal Sinestro. So Thal Sinestro is arguably one of the most powerful Green Lanterns to have ever existed. He ultimately ended up becoming kind of a dictator of his own homeworld. Instead of protecting Kruger and that sector, he actually just kind of became this ruler that literally controlled it with an iron fist. And because he betrayed the charter of the Green Lanterns, he was ultimately exiled from the Green Lantern Corps and then formed his own corps called the Sinestro Corps, in that where the Green Lantern Corps feeds on willpower, right? How much gumption, how much strength do you have to overcome the odds? That the Sinestro Corps is empowered by fear. How scared are you? And the result of this is that Kruger falls instantly. I mean, these guys never had a chance. Like, it's not even Sinestro or those guys who are here. It's basically just the planetary defense of Kruger. But these guys don't stand a chance against the power of new gods. It's like an army of Supermen just descending on this world. There's nothing they can do. They never had a chance to begin with. But fortunately for them, an SOS gets shot out into space, and Thal Sinestro overhears it. Right now, he's currently the ruler of Warworld. In the main DC universe, Warworld is actually ruled by somebody everybody else that basically turns it into like a giant tournament world, a giant battle world where all people do is just fight to the death. But with Thal Sinestro ruling it, this is where his Sinestro core resides. So we can largely assume the reason behind the Sinestro core's existence is the same here in DCeased as it is in the main DC universe. But the reality here, and really what he basically declares, is like, we are going to go save my homeworld Kruger. Now, under any normal circumstance, the Sinestro core would never do this. And if they did, they would arrive there to feed on the fear of that world in order to bolster their own power. And that would largely be it, right? This is not a humanitarian peacekeeping force. They don't do things because it's the right thing to do. That's the Green Lantern Corps, right? The Sinestro Corps just exists to bolster its own power. And so what we end up doing is that while they respond, we switch over to Superman, and we switch over to basically some of the superheroes on Earth. Because remember, Brainiac had come along. Now, Brainiac is wildly powerful, Brainiac's hugely capable, and Brainiac fell before the power of Darkseid. And this is really just DC showing us how far gone Darkseid is and the level of power that Darkseid possesses. Because the on-running theme here is that with Darkseid being possessed by the anti-life virus, then in a lot of ways, Darkseid's not even in control of his own faculties. He's more part of a hive mind, if you want to call it that, than anything else, but he's just kind of the leader, so to speak, right? He's kind of the one that sort of marshals everything and leads everything. And so it's a cool scenario because in this case, you have literally the superheroes who are here outside of Superman who are like, why would we trust Brainiac? This guy's a bad guy. This guy literally travels across the universe. He basically captures entire cities and then shrinks them down for his own personal collection. Countless beings have died because of the actions of Brainiac. Why would we trust him? And the reality here is the enemy of my enemy is my friend. That's literally what it boils down to. That Darkseid is the main focus here, right? Darkseid is the main bad guy here. And in times of desperation, this is what it leads to. That what you have are the forces of Darkseid spreading across the universe like a plague, and it cannot be easily stopped. That even somebody like Brainiac, as powerful as he is, fell before the power of Darkseid. Something to keep in mind, Brainiac is a challenge for Superman on a good day. This is the kind of being that we're looking at here. Falling before Darkseid in that capacity shows us just how dire things really are. And so the result of this is, okay, like, this is the alliance that we're making. We're allying ourselves with Brainiac, and not only that, we're reaching out to every single being across the universe that has not fallen before the power of Darkseid, and we're all gonna become allies. Even if they've just been mortal enemies over the years, even if all they've ever tried to do is destroy us, at the end of the day, saving the universe is more important than these stupid, petty squabbles that we have with these various villains that exist out there, because the unifying factor that we all share is we want to live, and that's a very powerful motivator. And so what this does is it switches back directly over to Thal Sinestro. And this is a really, really cool moment because Thal Sinestro literally taking the power of Warworld, that his intention is not to destroy the entirety of Kruger, but instead to basically start firing on those who are possessed by the anti-life and destroy them. The problem here is the attack is stopped by the arrival of Saronic Natu and Kyle Rayner. Now, Kyle Rayner being here is one of the cooler things, right? In DC Comics, Hal Jordan was like the most popular Green Lantern for years and years and years, and then eventually DC killed him off and they replaced him with Kyle Rayner, who arguably was equally, if not more popular. But he was the main Green Lantern for about a decade, all throughout pretty much the mid to late 1990s and the early 2000s, until Hal Jordan was eventually brought back as the Green Lantern by Jeff Johns. Saronic Natu is the daughter of Thal Sinestro. Now, in the main DC universe, like, Kyle Rayner and Saronic Natu kind of had an on-again, off-again relationship until the Robert Venditti run of Green Lantern, when they basically became enemies. And there was no love lost there, right? She hated Kyle Rayner because Kyle Rayner basically ended up having to destroy their future son. And because that was the case, things just kind of parted ways. Here in this universe, they're married, which is really cool to actually see that their relationship worked out, but they don't understand the full totality of the situation. As far as they're concerned, Thal Sinestro is up to his old tricks and attacking Kruger again. Now, the funny thing about this is Thal Sinestro himself, being so arrogant and so full of hubris, doesn't bother to explain what it is that he's actually doing. It's just one of those things where he's like, I know better than you two, stay out of my way, right? I have a bigger mission here. The problem is that their conversation is immediately interrupted by the arrival of Supergirl. And the reality here is, remember, the anti-life virus operates with what's basically a hive mind. And seeing that Thal Sinestro had Warworld at his disposal, that Warworld is powerful enough to destroy the entirety of Kruger if it needs to, and certainly obliterate most of those new gods who exist on Kruger itself and are in the process of conquering it. And so because the mother boxes serve as much of of a transportation device as they do the ability to transfer the virus to somebody else. Supergirl literally takes a mother box and smashes it into Warworld, and because it is a technological planet, it's overtaken by the anti-life virus. What this does is it literally turns Warworld from just this controllable object into one that works on behalf of the anti-life virus and can now literally go through the universe and just start spewing the anti-life virus onto everybody, or just annihilating entire worlds, right? Imagine, those of you guys coming from Marvel Comics, imagine that Galactus was infected with this anti-life virus, and that's more or less what you're looking at here in terms of destruction on a planetary level and the ability to spread that destruction over a rapid amount of time. And so with Kyle Rayner being knocked out, with Arkillo, who's really one of the more popular members of the Sinestro Corps, being destroyed, it really just comes down to Thal Sinestro and Saronic Natu. The problem with this is Darkseid makes his move, and Darkseid emerges onto the scene. Now, initially, and the way that we're told is like, you have Sinestro and you have his daughter, basically a Yellow Lantern and a Green Lantern, fighting side by side, and there is equilibrium. And in fact, they're an even match for the power of Darkseid and his Omega beams, and they're actually holding him off. The problem is, what little equilibrium existed here is immediately nullified when Supergirl goes back on the offense and literally gives the upper hand to Darkseid. And when that happens, Darkseid immediately seizes Thal Sinestro. And in these dying moments, and probably what's just one of the greatest moments of Thal Sinestro, God, man, it's phenomenal, dude. The way this ends is amazing. So in one of these these kind of dying moments of Sinestro, he literally tells Saronic, you have to run, right? You have to get out of here. You have to live so that you can free Karuger. You have to find allies, people who can fight on our side, and people who can ensure the survival of the universe. Only you can protect this world. And in that moment, as soon as he's done saying that, Darkseid kills Sinestro by ripping his head off. And literally, all that can happen here, Kyle Rayner's just like, we have to go. We can't stay here. If we stay, we die. Like, this guy killed Sinestro. Sinestro's more powerful than we are. There's no way we can overcome this force. And so with Kyle Rayner and Saronic Natu doing the only thing they can do, which is to just flee for their lives and then try to find some measure of allies that exist out there, most likely Superman and the existing Justice League, that what this does is it switches back to Darkseid. And with Thal Sinestro having died, as you guys know, when a lantern dies, as long as the ring is not destroyed, it searches for a new replacement. And that's exactly what the ring does, right? Ring status report, Sinestro 1 deceased. Scan for replacement sentient initiated, scan for replacement, and then it immediately goes to Darkseid. And it's like, you have the ability to instill great fear. Welcome to the Sinestro Corps. And Darkseid officially becomes a Yellow Lantern. So this story is gonna have one of the most amazing endings ever, so make sure you guys stick around for that. But I kind of forgot that DC was doing DCeased. Not gonna lie, I'm a little bit ashamed. I gotta get caught up, you know what I mean? So here's the thing, picking back up with this, right? We come off issues 1 and 2. Make sure you guys check the playlist down in the description so you can get caught up. We're literally 2 issues in, so we're just kind of picking up with issues 3 and 4 in this video, so you don't have a whole lot of catching up to do. But what this does is this initially focuses on a guy by the name of Adam Strange. Now, Adam Strange is a cool character, and he's a guy that you don't really see a whole lot of stories being done with, but he's got one of the most interesting aspects to any character in DC Comics. So check this out. The idea behind Adam Strange, and he's an old Julius Schwartz character from back in the 1950s. The idea behind Adam Strange is that on the planet Rann, right, you basically had the Emperor who did what's the equivalent of like shining a flashlight from half a mile away in the middle of the desert, right? Like you'd see that light and just be like, what's that, right? And you would go and see what it was. So the idea behind the people of Rann is they literally sent a Zeta beam down to Earth in the hopes that like people on Earth would be like, what in the world is this? They would trace it back to its source and they would come into contact with an extraterrestrial race, right? Expand the possibilities of humanity. What ended up happening is the Zeta beam was mutated through cosmic radiation. So when it hit Adam Strange, it basically gave him powers, and then it teleported him to the planet of Rann, where he basically ended up falling in love with this chick named Alana, right? He's actually got a child, right? So they basically have a kid together. But the idea behind the Zeta beam is that there is no real controlling it, right? Like Adam Strange will be teleported to Rann, and then he'll be there for a little while, then the Zeta beam will randomly teleport him back. There's no way of knowing when that's going to happen. So the idea behind his character is that he would literally just run around Earth trying to find where the new Zeta beam was going to arrive, and then then ride the beam back to Rand, where he would offer or really kind of operate as a protector of the planet while also trying to be with his love interest. It was cool, right? It was really, really cool. DC never really knew what to do with him, but the story behind him was great. And that's literally what happens here, right? Rand is one of the worlds that is under attack at the hands of basically the undead armada, right? If you guys remember everything we covered in the first 2 issues of War of the Undead Gods, that Darkseid has now re-emerged infected with the anti-life equation, right? Basically, this kind of anti-life version of like a zombie virus. Not only that, Darkseid's also a yellow lantern now, right? So it's a immensely powerful Darkseid, more so than he normally is. And this literally allowed all these zombies that have basically been moving around the universe and infecting worlds to coalesce under the power of Darkseid and then start moving forward with an intention, right? To literally start conquering world after world after world. And so where Adam Strange is teleported away, his wife and his kid are basically left there to fend for themselves as best they can, along with whatever survivors are there. Now, it's not something that takes them by surprise. Again, Alana's well familiar with this, his kid's well familiar with this, right? They're aware, it's just how these things go. And ironically enough, one of the downside of his character is that these things, the Zeta Beam would always activate at the most inconvenient time, right? So literally, this is the worst time for the beam to activate, but when it does, it teleports him back down to Earth and he arrives in Gotham City 2 months before a cure is found for the anti-life virus. And so what ends up happening is that as he's making his way through Gotham, he sees Wonder Woman while he's trying to understand what had happened here. Once he sees Wonder Woman, of course, she was infected. This is, of course, before she died, but she was infected. She immediately attacks Adam Strange and turns Adam Strange into one of the zombies. So what ends up happening is about 2 weeks later, Adam Strange is teleported back to Rand using a Zeta Beam, and when he arrives, he's infected and then attacks his family. So it's just the craziest thing, right? It's absolutely bonkers. Now, a few days after that, we basically transition over to the Rylex system with one of the coolest moments, right? One of the absolute best moments in this. It's not the crazy ending that I was telling you about, but it is one of the coolest moments, right? So basically here in this bar, and when you guys know, when we're talking about a bar out in space in DC Comics, you know who we're talking about. We're talking about the main man, Lobo himself. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. Now, anybody out there who's not familiar with Lobo, this guy was designed back in the day to be like an over-the-top version of Wolverine from Marvel Comics that basically was on par with the power of Superman. Lobo's a hoss, right? This guy is amazing. But the thing about this is this guy kind of shows up out of nowhere and says, like, I'm looking for somebody noble who can basically, you know, help fend the universe against whatever threat is out there, right? This massive threat that's kind of running around. We're looking for somebody to help us. Is anybody down, right? Is anybody, you know, interested in this? Now, of course, Lobo's like, what does it pay? And this guy's like, I am looking for someone noble. You clearly do not fit that description. Now, the problem here is everybody hears this said, and it's just kind of like, bruh, that ain't what you want to say to a man like Lobo. Right? But the crazy thing about this is before Lobo can help this guy finish with all his living, we end up having a Thanagarian warship that arrives onto the scene. And as this warship emerges, of course, all these Thanagarians who had basically been taken over by the anti-life virus, basically the race where like Hawkman and Hawkgirl come from, that they literally start like pouring into the entirety of the bar and even the planet as a whole and start attacking everybody. Now, the funny thing about this is one of these guys attacks Lobo and they scratch him. Now, under normal circumstances, a person would change. Lobo does not, because Lobo has an insane healing factor. He can heal from pretty much anything. In fact, Lobo's been cut into pieces and then just reconstituted himself. Again, his level of just strength and durability and healing factor is designed to be ridiculously over the top and comical. In this story, it pays off because this guy's like, you do not turn. And Lobo's like, oh, I can turn, right? I can keep turning and turning until your head comes off your shoulders, and like rips his head off. And he's like, nobody starts killing Lobo's bartenders without Lobo doing anything about it. So Lobo literally shows up here and annihilates the entirety of not only the Thanagarian warship, but most of the Thanagarians themselves. And that's where this guy's like, okay, so like, I guess you are the warrior I was looking for, right? A guy who's really capable. I mean, you got problems, right? But we could use you, right? I mean, you know, we can make it work. You know what I mean? We can make it work, right? So literally, what we do here is we switch over to Themyscira. Now again, Themyscira is throwing a funeral for Wonder Woman. Now it's one of those things that's really cool here because of course Diana was turned by the virus and then literally was instrumental in slaughtering I don't know how many people on Earth. But the thing about this is before all of that, she was Diana, right? Like the princess of Themyscira, Wonder Woman, and Amazon. So it's one of those things where just because she was turned by a virus and led to the wholesale slaughter of pretty much all of humanity, doesn't make her a bad guy, right? We all make mistakes. Right? We all make mistakes. We all do things that we don't mean to do. And sometimes we say things we don't mean to say. But in all seriousness, right? Wonder Woman has always been an exceedingly honorable member of the superhero community. And because of that, her people on Themyscira, she's a sister to them. So it's less that Wonder Woman went on this rampage as some kind of a villain, and more that she was a victim of a circumstance that she couldn't control. And so with this funeral being held for her, what you end up having is, of course, Artemis and Oliver Queen. Now, Artemis, she's a little more interesting. This is really, I would say, Tom Taylor, building on what's been happening with DC Comics over the last few years as far as Artemis goes, that the idea behind her character is that she was an Amazon that ultimately ended up making her way out into the larger superhero community, not really in an identical way to Wonder Woman. And of course, she fought alongside Red Hood in The Outlaws, which was an amazing comic in DC Rebirth. Oh my God, Red Hood? Oh, you guys remember that? Red Hood and The Outlaws from DC Rebirth? Dude, that story was amazing. DC's absolutely jumped the shark in recent years, but back when DC Rebirth was, dude, everything was the best thing coming out of DC Rebirth. I'm just saying, like, the stories were absolutely amazing. But of course, they basically fire off the arrows to, you know, as kind of a funeral pyre for Wonder Woman, and that's when Ares, the god of war, shows up. Now, under normal circumstances, when Ares shows up, it's because he's looking to start some stuff, right? Kind of stir that pot a little bit, get conflict brewing by feeding off the conflicts of people, inciting them into war with each other, different things like that. But the thing about this is that with his arrival, the Themyscirians absolutely like immediately turn on him, right? The Amazons like turn on this guy and they're like, you're not welcome here. You don't need to be here. But of course he tells them like, I am not here to be your enemy. I'm not here to incite conflict or to incite war. And yes, myself and Wonder Woman were massive enemies over the years, but one, I'm here to pay my respects to an honorable warrior. And two, I basically am enlisting you guys in a gigantic conflict that's going on. I will show you what's happening. And so what he does is he brings all of them to the Hall of the Gods. And of course, he basically ends up giving the arrow of Apollo to Oliver Queen, right? To Green Arrow, which is cool, right? Because he basically gets the bow of a god. Now, of course, he says the weight feels a little off. Can I tweak it? And the response of Ares is just like, can you tweak the golden bow of Apollo? A bow that hunted the great beasts of Carcoom, whatever, that slew the Leviathan lion. And Oliver's like, yeah, man, it's a little top heavy. And he's like, fine, you know, you can tweak it. So one of the things I love about Tom Taylor writing is he kind of has the ability to sort of inject humor with characters that you wouldn't normally expect to be humorous. Ares is never really a humorous guy, right? He's never really the guy where like he jokes and, you know, and makes little comments and stuff, but it's more the context of the situation that makes the whole thing funny. But the reality is that when they ask Ares, what is it that you want from us, right? Like, why did you bring us here? And so what Ares says is there's a war coming, right? Now, of course, Cassie Sandsmark, who was at one point Wonder Woman, literally says like, we just had a war. Now you're here. Billions died before this. And this is where things get crazy because what Ares says is that was no war. There was no struggle. There was only defeat. I am not the god of slaughter. And that's an important distinction to understand here, right? When you look at the entirety of DCeased, it is kind of easy to look at that and say, it's a war of the survivors versus the ones who were infected. But that's not how it played out. Remember back in like the first DC story, what happened? People got infected and the world ended. Like over the course of the first, like the original story arc, the original DC story arc, that happened, if I remember, over the course of like a few days, like maybe a week or two, but the world collapsed almost immediately. It was literally just people being infected and the superheroes fleeing for their lives because the infection had spread so incredibly fast, really thanks to the Flash who'd been infected, that there was nothing anybody could do, right? So the superheroes were just trying to save who they could, where they could, and got out as fast as they can, right? There was no war. It was just people fleeing for their lives. And so that's literally what he's saying now. And of course, what is kind of nuts is he says that it's not just a war that's coming, but it's a war that cannot be won. The final war, right? It will be glorious, but ultimately futile. I will stay to watch the end, but every race in the universe will die. And so when the question's asked, how can you be so certain of our failure? And he says, because all of this has happened before. And that's what's so cool about this, right? It's literally Battlestar Galactica. All of this has happened before, and all of it will happen again. He says, this is how the entire universe was infected. And so where Oliver asks the question, like Ares presents a book to him, right? And says, this is how things unfolded before. The response of Oliver Queen is the most logical one, where he's like, okay, so if what you're holding is a record book, right? A book that says like, this is how things transpired before, somebody had to have survived to tell the tale, which means if there was one survivor, there was more than one survivor. Otherwise, every race would have just died out for no other reason than the fact that they can't procreate anymore, right? So that means if there were survivors, then the question has to be asked, how did we survive this last time? And the response of Ares is, no one did. This is a record from a universe that was lost, right? A universe that was completely and totally lost. And so at that moment, you basically have Dinah, who's basically the Green Canary, right? She got a Green Lantern ring, that she's contacted by the Guardians of the Universe, who were just like, we're calling every single Green Lantern across the universe back to Oa. We're forming a staging ground, right? We're going to use Oa as a battleground to figure out how we can defeat all these different undead folks who are out there. And that's when Ares says, it begins, right? And so literally this goes out to everyone out there, right? Kyle Rayner, John Stewart, like Kilowog, the whole 9 yards. Guy Gardner, who's out there, every single Green Lantern. Not only that, the response of the Guardians on Oa is like, bring everybody who is an ally, everybody who's alive, any able-bodied man and woman who can fight, that has any measure of power, bring them to Oa, right? Every superpowered being in the universe is coming here if we can find some way to stage, keep this conflict from spreading beyond what it already is. But the funny thing here is kind of jumping back to Ares, the response of Oliver Queen is, well, things are different now. When the whole event first kicked off, we had no idea what was going on, but now we have a cure. We have the ability to cure everybody. Like Oliver's stance is like, we've basically already won. The only issue that we have now is how do we get a cure to everybody out there in order to turn them back to normal? And the response of Ares is, you're not fighting an equation, right? And that's when like Cassie chimes in and says, yeah, but Darkseid said, and Ares' response is, Darkseid is a new god. He's a child, right? A powerful pawn for something much larger. He had no idea what he was doing when he merged the anti-life equation with death. The gaze that's been turned towards us, that's the real threat. He says, this is no equation. This is older than numbers, older than the gods. The universe will die. And he says, Erebos is here, right? So Erebos is this being that's basically behind all of this, right? This is the force that was unleashed. Now, from here, we switch over to one of the coolest parts of the story, right? One of the coolest parts of this, that what ends up happening here is Alfred initially has these visions where, if you recall, in the first DC story, he was forced to kill Batman and Tim Drake and Dick Grayson. He was forced to kill these guys. So the only person that was really left here was basically Damian Wayne. Now, if I recall correctly, I don't remember off the top of my head, I want to say that Red Hood survived, but I can't remember. I know he was part of one of the tie-in stories, so if you guys recall down in the comments section, let me know. I could look it up, but like I'm in the middle of recording this right now, so you know, I'm a single task person. I don't do very well when it comes to multitasking. But of course, all these visions and everything kind of wake Alfred up out of his sleep, and he's basically there accompanied by Leslie Tompkins. Now, Leslie Tompkins had for the longest time been an ally of Batman. She was kind of comparable to Night Nurse from Marvel Comics. She was much older than that, or at least had been around longer than that. But the idea behind Leslie is she was the one that would tend to the wounds of Batman if he needed it, or she would help other members of the superhero community depending on the circumstance. She was a very significant character in the Batman mythos. Over the years, she lost that level of importance in DC Comics, and it's just kind of been relegated to a background character. So one of the cool things about Tom Taylor's run is that he has sort of bolstered her presence back up to being a significant member of the Bat family, even if it's only here to be a love interest and somebody to comfort Alfred. But the thing about this is that when Damian and Jonathan tell Alfred they have to leave, that they have to go join the Guardians of the Galaxy, the Guardians of the Universe, in order to deal with this massive threat of the undead armada, that initially Alfred begs Damian not to go, right? He's like, please don't leave. I already lost your father. I already lost what were basically my sons. I don't want to lose another son again. But the reality of Damian, and this really shows how much he's changed since like the initial outbreak happened and how he's really become a hero, that stepping into this role, his response to Alfred is, this is much bigger than me, right? It's much bigger than you. This is literally the fate of the universe. And if I can die in order to save the universe, then it's a death worth having. I don't want to. I'm not going into this with the expectation that I die, but if I do, it will be for a great cause. And so the response of Alfred, and this is incredibly important here because I have a theory about this. I don't know if it's actually happened yet, but I have a theory about this. The response of Alfred is, if I can't get you to stay here, then I want to fight alongside all of you, right? I want to fight alongside you guys in defeating these undead gods. They've taken so much from me, and I don't want to sit on the sidelines and basically do nothing. And the response of Damian is, you really want to fight against these guys? And the response of Alfred is, yes, you have to find a way. A weapon, a power, a ring, whatever it is, I want to fight. I don't want to sit uselessly on the sidelines. Now, of course, this leads to Damian and Jonathan taking their leave and ultimately going, but it's really not without Damian saying, like, you say that there's so much of my father in me. I say there's a lot of my father in you, because he would say the same thing, right? If he were in your position, he would say, like, I don't want to sit on the sidelines. If for whatever reason Bruce Wayne was incapable of operating as Batman, say he was wheelchair bound or something like that, and didn't have a suit that could compensate by giving him the ability to move, that he would simply say, like, I want to do something. I want to be able to fight in some capacity. Or maybe Batman's like 90 years old, like he is in Batman Beyond, right? He's like 1,000,000 years old and just grizzled and just this crotchety old son of a gun in the Batcave. But still, you know, it's one of those things, because my theory here is that Alfred is going to become a Green Lantern. I don't know if that's going to happen, but I think Alfred's going to be a Green Lantern. And the reason why I say that is, if you guys remember Tom Taylor's Injustice, Alfred took a pill that gave him the powers of Superman and beat the crap out of Superman and rescued Batman from almost being killed by Superman, and then took Batman out of the Batcave and just left Superman there. But Tom Taylor has a way of always like giving Alfred some kind of power, right? Giving Alfred some kind of an ability. At this point, we switch over to Almerac. Now, I'm going to be honest with you guys, man. We're basically shown Maxima, right? Now, here's the thing. Anybody who's been reading DC Comics for any measure of time probably had the same response that I did, where you're like, Maxima? She hasn't been relevant since like the days when Superman died, which is true. So the idea behind Maxima, and it's one of the most crazy things, the idea behind Maxima is that DC was tired of the idea of like Batman, I almost said Batman and Superman. They were tired of the idea of like, of Superman and Lois Lane. And so the idea of Maxima is that her and Superman were genetically compatible. And so what that meant is that she could give Superman like the perfect kids, right? Superman didn't want to marry her and didn't want to have any kids with her, so he ultimately rejected her. But it was an attempt by DC Comics to create a new love interest for Superman. But the thing about this is that she hasn't been relevant since. She appeared in a couple different comics here and there, but like literally no one cared, right? It's just kind of like, oh, cool, Maxima, whatever, man, and just keep turning the page. So it is interesting to see her here, but much like her complete and total level of irrelevance in DC Comics, she's also irrelevant here, because her planet is attacked by Darkseid and the Undead Armada, and they're all conquered, and that's the story of her. So of course, what we end up doing here is jumping back to Oa and like the coming together of all the Guardians of the universe, as well as all the superheroes who are here. Now everybody, like all the superpowered survivors or any able-bodied person who can fight, this is numbered potentially in the billions, right? Just this massive crowd being addressed by the Guardians. And what they say is that the Undead Armada has already taken 12 planets, right? These 12 planets have been seized, completely and totally razed, and their occupants or their races converted into members of the undead. And it's just spreading like a plague, right? Their numbers are growing at an exponential rate. One person bites 2, those 2 bite 4, those 4 bite 8, those 8 bite 16. You understand what I'm saying? Like, it's just moving, and it's just moving so fast and spreading across the universe so quickly that the response of the Guardians is, there's only one thing we can do here, right? Like another 7 planets with species clearly seen as assets by the anti-life equation have been infected. So now we're at 19, and he says, we are sanctioning lethal force. These infected worlds have to be wiped away. Now, this is an important distinction because traditionally the Green Lanterns are a peacekeeping force. One of the rules that was laid down when it came to the Guardians of the Universe is the Green Lanterns could not take lives. In more recent years in DC Comics, that changed during Jeff Johns' run on Green Lantern with the Sinestro Corps War. It was one of the massive moments of the conflict because like the Sinestro Corps, the Yellow Lanterns, are just like wiping out Green Lanterns everywhere they find them because Sinestro knows like the Green Lanterns can't harm anybody, and that way they can't end a life. And so literally in the middle of this battle, the Guardians are like, we have no choice. And all these Green Lantern rings start lighting up with the statement, lethal force is now sanctioned. And like the tide turns like that. Like it's nuts. The Green Lanterns are like, it's on like Donkey Kong, and they start taking it to the Sinestro Corps. God, that story is so good. It was so phenomenal. But the thing about this is that in response to this, of course, Superman, who's now cured of the anti-life virus, and his son Jonathan do exactly what you would expect them to, which is say, we can't wipe out these worlds. We have a cure. We should be focusing on how to cure these people in terms of wiping these people out. Now, there are moral arguments on both sides and reasonable arguments on both sides. The stance of Superman and Jonathan is the preservation of life, helping people as opposed to ending people. But Brainiac and these guys who are survivors and have allied themselves against the anti-life virus, their response is the possible risk of going to the anti-life armada and trying to inject people with a cure. The risk is too great because all that would have to happen is Jonathan Kent or Superman or some other being out there with incredible levels of power, or Brainiac with his incredible intellect. All would happen is they're turned and it's game over, right? Like the dominoes fall and it's the end of everything. The risk is too great. The only thing that we can really do in order to bring this thing to an end is to eradicate everybody there. So there's reasonable arguments on both sides, right? Sometimes the risk of the cure is worse than the disease, so you just wipe out the disease, which also includes wiping people out. So it's one of those weird situations where you can kind of create arguments on both sides. But of course, what ends up happening is Superman responds kind of uncharacteristically by lashing out and in fact attacking Ganthet, right? Just like punching this guy, right? Just like knocking this guy out. Because literally Ganthet is just like, if you stand against us and everybody else who's joined you, we will destroy you. Like we'll lock you up in a prison, that'll be the end of it, and we will go and take out these worlds. And so Superman attacking Ganthet is not something that you normally see. And so it's kind of weird because while all this is happening, we end up finding out Ares is basically watching all of this unfold. And what's so interesting about this is that it's actually Damian Wayne who picks up on what's happening. He's looking around at this whole situation and how quickly everybody went crazy and all started attacking each other, and his response is something's wrong, right? Like I can feel it. My pulse is elevated, my judgment's clouded, my emotional response is heightened. We are not in control of this situation. And that's when he sees Ares and realizes Ares is kind of goading them all into fighting each other because Ares is the god of war and is just kind of into that cool stuff. Now, of course, literally Damian says like, you're manipulating us, god of war. And the response of Ares is, I just gave you all a little nudge. Damian says, stop this. And then a voice comes out of nowhere and says, you should listen to that little man, Ares. This voice is coming from Mr. Mxyzptlk. He says, I won't let you hurt Superman. The fifth dimensional imp with the power of a god is here. Mr. Mxyzptlk, this guy can alter reality on a whim. So the real question you have to ask here is, what would happen in DCeased if Mr. Mxyzptlk is converted to an undead god? What would happen there? Because all he has to do is alter reality and it's the end of everything. What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and the ending of this video is going to be crazy, but we are back with DCeased, which technically we're not supposed to release until later on this week, but I want to release it today. So what we end up doing here is, again, picking up on Earth 2, which in the world of DCeased is basically just another Earth or another world within the DC universe that is habitable for humanity. I know for all you guys out there who are DC aficionados, and some of you all have been asking this in the comments, is it Earth 2 in like an alternate universe? No, it's not the traditional alternate reality Earth 2. It's just like a world over that way that basically allows humanity to live on it, right? Because it's sustainable to human life or conducive to human life. So what we end up getting here, while all these different superheroes are basically marshaling their forces, working alongside the Green Lanterns, the Guardians of the Universe, is we end up having the arrival of the Black Racer. The Black Racer is basically an aspect of death. So much like you have in Marvel Comics where you have like Mistress Death, in DC Comics you have Death of the Endless. So it is an actual kind of cosmic entity, if you want to call it that represents what it means to officially die, right? Like your soul leaves your body and you go on to the afterlife. But Death of the Endless rarely ever actually interacts with anybody. Instead, what she basically does is she largely has avatars. So if we take like the Green Lanterns, for example, Necron is the avatar for the Green Lanterns themselves. Technically, it represents death in the emotional spectrum, but nonetheless, right, it represents like the lack of life. But in effect, it is the aspect of Death of the Endless that deals with the Green Lanterns. The Black Flash deals with the Flash family, all the speedsters. The Black Racer deals with the New Gods, and everybody else just dies and their soul just goes to the afterlife. So that's kind of how these things work, right? So again, it's really more just like, imagine it as like Death of the Endless just kind of like removes parts of herself and says, you're gonna hang out with the Green Lanterns, you're gonna hang out with the Flashes, and you're gonna hang out with the New Gods. And that's basically how this works, right? So governors that basically deal with the Flash or deal with death. But the way this thing shows up is we kind of only get really Black Racer for a moment or two. Technically, its statement is that these superheroes can't kill it, which leads us into Mixie, Mr. Mixopidalic. Some guy's been commenting down in the videos and been saying that like I've been pronouncing his name wrong. Don't care. Here's the thing, right? Mixopidalic, this guy's wildly powerful, right? He is immensely powerful. The guy's a reality warper, right? A fifth dimensional imp. There's nothing beyond his ability to achieve. That's one of the more significant things about his character, and it's why him showing up here is a pretty big deal. I mean, you do have Ares who's kind of thumping his chest, you know, in the face of Mixie, but the truth about this is Ares would never stand a chance against this guy. Nobody in this universe would, right? He's just that powerful. One of the other funny things is that the conversation that goes on is that you have the Guardians of the Universe who are directly speaking with the superheroes, and the superheroes talk about how Erebos is the one that's basically behind all of this stuff. That when DCeased initially kicked off, it really just kind of seemed like it was Darkseid basically merging the anti-life equation with the concept of death. And that gave us all these people who were infected with anti-life. The revelation that we learned recently is that Erebos is some kind of entity that exists out there that we don't really know anything about, but it's just kind of been moving from universe to universe, wiping out everything in existence by basically spreading anti-life, or by somebody doing what Darkseid did and inviting Erebos into the universe. But the way that it's talked about here, Erebos seems more like a presence or a concept or an ideology as opposed to a physical being that exists out there. Again, we don't really know anything about it, and we'll probably figure out as time goes on, but the Guardians of the Universe are aware of what Erebos is. But that's why I say it's one of the weird things, because you don't really see Superman asking a question like, are you familiar with his name, right? Or like her name. You never really see them actually given a pronoun. It's more just sort of spoken indirectly, right? Like, you know this name, that kind of a thing. So that's why I say it may or may not be like a physical, tangible being as much as an ideology. But the response of Ganthet here is that if Erebus is at the heart of this, then it changes everything. The core cannot be used to wipe away infected planets. All Green Lanterns are to guard Oa. The central power battery must be protected at all costs. Now, this is an important distinction to understand here. And the reason why is because, remember, the central power battery is the source of power for the Green Lanterns themselves. But it does this by tapping into the emotional spectrum. So if you can consider this as kind of a link, right, sort of a chain, you have the emotional spectrum, which channels the power of willpower into the Green Lantern central power battery, which in turn is channeled into the Green Lanterns. If any of the Green Lanterns were presumably corrupted by Erebos, that would allow it to enter into the emotional spectrum, and by doing so, spread through the emotional spectrum and basically corrupt it all, right? Like willpower, fear, the whole nine yards. It would dominate all life. The thing that's not really said here by Tom Taylor, and really my assumption here, is that the emotional spectrum, as we know, exists on a multiversal level, which means every universe that exists out there can tap into the emotional spectrum. We've known that ever since War of the First Lanterns during Jeff Johns' run on the Green Lantern storyline. And so what this would mean is that if Erebus was able to access the emotional spectrum, it could actually conquer the entirety of the multiverse in one fell swoop, and that would be nuts, right? So it's one of those things where it's like, to keep this guy from contaminating all creation across all existence in the multiverse, we have to stop him here, or at least no Green Lantern can directly come into contact with him. Now, the other part of this is Damian, right, operating as Batman, asked the question, you guys watch the universe and everything that goes on. Can you show us where the spread is, right? Show us what the front lines look like so we know where to send the most capable heroes or where we should focus our energies at. And the response of Ganthet is like, are you serious? The front lines are everywhere, man. Like, this is not some conflict where like Darkseid and his forces are going from this planet to that planet to to that planet. They're not following a linear progression. That's what makes the virus just grow at a geometric rate, is they spread out like a plague, and they conquer a variety of planets all at one time, right? They literally just jump from world to world, and they all do it. And that's what leads to the virus spreading so fast, because what he does is he shows them a world called Balavox Vic, which is basically a world that belongs to Kilowog, but there's 16 billion people on this planet. These 16 billion people, just as an example, if they were conquered and taken over by the anti-life virus, using the power of the anti-life virus and the fact that they're basically dead, they can breathe in the vacuum of space, they would spread out to the stars, and who knows how many other worlds they would hit, right? Another world with 10 billion people on it, another world with 5 billion people, and suddenly that collective 15 billion people is combined with the 16 billion people, and you've got 31 billion people traveling around the cosmos, conquering worlds. You guys see what I'm talking about, and you see why the universe fell so fast when it came to the anti-life virus, that it's just one of those things where everything grows at an exponential rate. And so what ends up happening here is that as they're talking, you end up having Ganthet that says that they have to reform the quintessence. Of course, the quintessence being some of the most powerful beings, or really the most powerful beings throughout the entirety of the DC universe. But the problem here is that it's literally figured things out by committee. Somebody like Guy Gardner doesn't want to have to deal with that. He's like, that's ridiculous. I'm not going to sit around while you guys vote by committee to figure out whether or not the universe is worth saving. We're going to get out there and we're going to fight. And ultimately, the hands of the Guardians are tied. If the Guardians were, for example, to shut down the central power battery and take away the Green Lantern's source of power, then what happens if the anti-life virus reaches Oa and the Guardians aren't there? There's no one to protect it. All the Green Lanterns fall. The central power battery is left without any form of protection, and then it's game over, right? It's just that kind of thing. So honestly, what really ends up happening here is the Green Lanterns actually leave with Kilowog when he takes off to go to his home planet in order to basically try to save his people. And then you have like Mixie and then Superman and Jonathan Kent. Now, Jonathan Kent wants to go with Superman to fight in this battle, but the response to Superman is no, like that's not going to be the case, right? He literally says, this is one planet, right? You saw the Guardian's vision. There are dozens of planets that need us, billions of lives being threatened as we speak. I wish I could take you with me, keep you near me, keep you safe, but I need you to protect our two Earths. I need you to start saving the planets the Guardians have given up on. So it's a really significant moment, and the reason why is because in recent years, especially if you go back to, what is it, the Superman, Lois and Clark comic book by Dan Jurgens, where they basically brought back the pre-Flashpoint Superman, that Jonathan Kent was a little kid. Even going into like Super Sons and different stories like that, Action Comics Rebirth, Superman Rebirth, it was largely Superman trying to protect his son. But ever since Brian Michael Bendis's trash-ass run on Superman, where basically he aged up Jonathan Kent and turned him into a teenager, which was what nobody wanted to have happen, but Bendis did it anyway because that guy just doesn't know how to write Superman, that it basically led to Superman kind of having to take a more hands-off approach to Jonathan Kent. This kind of conversation is honestly the sort of stuff that we should have been seeing during Bendis's run. It's less of Superman trying to protect his son, and it's more Superman trying to teach his son to be a more effective hero. It's what we saw during Action Comics Rebirth and Superman Rebirth, which were amazing stories. Just kind of a sidetrack here, if you ever want to know what some of the best Superman stories were in recent years, check out the videos that I did on Action Comics and Superman Rebirth. They're phenomenal. Oh my god, those stories were amazing. But the thing here is that ultimately, Jonathan Kent just kind of has to stay behind, and Superman takes off along with Kilowog and everybody else to arrive on his planet. Now, the funny thing about this is that for the people of Kilowog, they share a kind of hive mind, right? Which is to say, they're highly empathetic and they can feel the emotions of every other member on their race. And so the result of this is that when Kilowog gets there, his mind basically rejoins the collective, and all he feels is absolute terror. Now, if you're not familiar with Kilowog and the Green Lanterns, this moment's lost on you. But if you are familiar with Kilowog, it's huge. And the reason why, for those of you guys who really aren't familiar with his character, Kilowog's hardcore, man. He's like the drill instructor for the Green Lantern Corps. Right? This guy, he's got it where it counts. And if you're stranded out there by yourself, Kilowog is really the guy you'd want coming to your side. The fact that he's quite literally shivering in his boots right now is a testament to the terror he feels connected with the rest of his people and the terror they feel, which is being fed into him. But his kind of emotional state is bolstered when you get the arrival of the rest of the Green Lanterns. But this is important because remember, the Green Lanterns derive their abilities from the willpower portion of the emotional spectrum. The more willpower they have, the more capable they are. The less willpower they have, meaning their confidence begins to wane, the less capable they are. So without the other Green Lanterns showing up here, there's a better than fair chance that literally Kilowog Kilowog would have just been annihilated, because at the end of the day, his willpower just wouldn't have been where it traditionally would have been because of the fear that he was feeling, right? Just the weakness of the Green Lanterns. And so what you have is, of course, you have the Green Lanterns, you've got Superman, you got all these guys who were trying to protect the people of Kilowog as best they can. Enter Supergirl. Now, the funny thing about this is that Superman has not met Supergirl yet. Remember, like during the DCeased in this story, in this universe, Supergirl never crash landed on Earth, right? She was never sent there. Instead, she was sent to the world of the New Gods. She was sent to New Genesis, where Highfather was to reside. But by the time she got there, they'd already been infected with the anti-life virus. So as soon as she got there, she was immediately subdued and taken over. She didn't stand a chance. Superman's never seen her before. And that's why he asked the question, who are you? Why are you wearing that symbol? And so the result of this is that she's able to annihilate some of the people on this world. Superman's kind of hopeless to stand by and watch, because out of nowhere comes Darkseid, and Supergirl just kind of watches on as Darkseid intends to thrash Superman. Enter Mixie, right? Mr. Mxyzptlk himself. Dude, it's so cool to see this guy, right? There's never been a time that I'm aware of in DC Comics when Mixie has fought Darkseid. I'm not aware of that at all. But we get this amazing moment here, right? Literally, he says, okay, that's enough, new god. What should I turn you into? A houseplant? A persuasive essay? And it says all Mixie had to do was think it, and Darkseid would have been undone. But he didn't have time to think. And this is one of the things to remember, right? Remember how the anti-life equation initially spread throughout Earth. Remember how it started? Smartphones, TVs, tablets. People saw it, they witnessed the equation, and in doing so, they were corrupted by it. And that's literally what Tom Taylor says, right? The virus spread in two ways, and while Mixie was no doubt confident he couldn't be harmed, which he couldn't be hurt by Darkseid, he could still see. And all it took was a corrupted mother box to show him the anti-life equation, and it's game over. Mixie is infected like that, right? He's the most powerful force under control of the anti-life equation right now. This guy could literally undo everybody with just a thought. Now, this is the way that Tom Taylor plays this, and I actually like the way that he does this. Under any normal circumstance, if Mixie was basically full of his own capabilities, right? Meaning he had his own, he had his own mind, and he was operating rationally and stuff like that, there's no limit to the kind of stuff he can do. What it looks like the anti-life equation does is it kind of reduces people down to a more primitive state. So he's not as capable as he normally would be. Now, whether or not this is something you agree with depends on, you know, on how you feel like the story should end, right? Like your own personal opinions will infer whether or not you agree with this kind of thing, which makes sense, right? I mean, everybody interprets stories in their own way. But the reality here is that instead of Mixie just snapping his fingers and everybody turns into like a bouquet of roses, he literally just like starts attacking everyone. Now, Kilowog and John Stewart respond as soon as it happens, but Mixie immediately like seizes control of him. They form a protective orb as best they can. It gets crushed. John Stewart and Kilowog die like that. Like they're just dead, gone, out of the picture. It's one of the reasons why I love Tom Taylor's writing when it comes to this stuff, man, is because at any point in time, any superhero can die. It's one of the greatest things about his writing when it comes to these alternate reality stories, because by and large, when it comes to DC, no matter what happens in a story, like Superman will always come out on top, right? The Green Lanterns will eventually always come out on top. It's always that way, right? It's just the superheroes always win. It's just how long will it take them to win, and what will they have to go through until they do. When it comes to these alternate reality stories by Tom Taylor, anything goes, right? Like there's no rules. And it's the reason why these stories that he does are so phenomenal, right? They're absolutely amazing, because basically with this world destroyed and Mixie unleashed, he immediately takes off for the world of Oa. And when he gets there, he annihilates the central power battery. And we get this amazing point where it's like, and everywhere Green Lanterns were severed from their power, exposing the core to gravity and to the vacuum of space. They're literally just suffocating out there with no oxygen whatsoever, right? It's almost like from Injustice when Kyle Rayner was pulled apart by the Sinestro Corps and dropped into the sun, right? Just like killed in space. It was pretty gruesome, right? It was pretty brutal. But the thing about this is that while the quintessence meets, you've got Hera of the Greek gods, you've got the Phantom Stranger, who even goes as far as to say, like, the Wizard Shazam is dead, Highfather is a slave to the anti-life equation. I was almost destroyed by Trigon fighting this, which I'm not aware that we ever actually got a story where the Phantom Phantom Stranger fought Trigon, and if we didn't, we need that. Maybe I'm missing something. If I am, let me know down in the comments, because maybe it's a story that we didn't cover, and if we didn't, we will fix that with a quickness. Let me know, like, let me know down in the comment section what's going on. But the bigger point that the Phantom Stranger's making is the quintessence numbers are decreasing. This universe will likely be lost to Erebos, but the response of the Spectre, right, the living embodiment of God's vengeance, wrath, whatever you want to call it, like literally they kind of refer to it as both. His response is, I'm not going to let this universe fall. I'm not going to let another universe fall to Erebos. So he literally takes off, and then suddenly the power of the Green Lanterns starts to restore, right? It starts to come back. And we end up finding out the reason why is because the Spectre seized control of the central power battery of the Green Lanterns, reconstituted it, and wielding the power of the Green Lanterns and the willpower of the emotional spectrum, which will likely lead to him becoming a Green Lantern, he fashions the Sword of God and then goes after Mixie. And that's the end. Thanks for watching, guys. No, this is actually the cliffhanger though, right? So in the next video, we will cover what happens next. What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are back with DCeased, and I am coming down with a cold, so I may not necessarily be as crazy and animated as I normally am. But as is the case with a Tom Taylor comic, the ending of this is crazy. That's always the case with Tom Taylor. So what we end up doing here is we pick up with Superman. There is a bit of a prelude when it comes to Lobo, but we'll talk about him presumably in the next issue when he makes his appearance as part of the main conflict. But what goes on here is it initially picks up with Superman. And this basically deals with the destruction of Balavax Vic. Right now, if you guys remember the last video that we did, and as always, you'll find the DCeased playlist down in the description so that if you're just joining us, you can get caught up on everything. But as we talked about in the last video, this was destroyed by Mr. Mxyzptlk, who is one of the most powerful beings to ever exist in the history of DC Comics. And the fact that this guy has now been turned to the army of the dead, right? Like the army of Darkseid, right? The undead army. It changes everything, because Mr. Mxyzptlk, this guy can alter reality just with a snap of his fingers. This guy can go toe-to-toe with the most powerful beings that exist out there in DC. And so this is kind of a worst case scenario. We don't know the full totality of his abilities, and we don't even know if he can access his true power anymore. But the important thing here is that with Mr. Mxyzptlk becoming part of the undead army, he destroys the planet of Balavax Vic. Now, there are a couple reasons why the superheroes even responded to this world in the first place when the undead army was heading there. There's really only two main reasons. The first is because of Kilowog, who's a member of the Green Lantern Corps, and the fact that it's his own home planet. And it's more or less the Green Lantern saying, we will ally with you because you're one of us, and we'll do everything we can to protect your home world. The other part of this was just self-preservation. Balavax Vic is home to 16 billion people, with a B. You're talking about an army so vast that it bolsters the existing vastness of Darkseid's army and makes conquering the universe all the easier. And so for everybody who really wasn't a Green Lantern and didn't really even know Kilowog on a personal level, it really required their intervention, because had they not stepped in, presumably 16 billion foes, or 16 billion people or so, would have bolstered the army of Darkseid. Such as it was, they're all dead, right? So I guess it's kind of a zero sum now if you're a person who lacks empathy. Like, hey, dead man can't fight a war. So that's basically what this is now. But at the end of the day, there is a bit of somberness that comes in the aftermath of this, and the destruction of this entire world hits Superman hard, because for the second time over the course of DCeased, and even the second time in his life in this alternate reality story, he has to basically watch a world fall. The first time it happened was when the outbreak happened on Earth, right? When like everybody on Earth was either becoming infected or they were killed, or they managed to escape, they managed to flee. But like that was it, right? Humanity, just regular people, there was no real hope for them. There was no real saving them. And so Superman did what he could where he could, but even he fell to the power of the undead, of the anti-life virus. And so when that happened, of course, ultimately he was saved, hence the reason why he's here now. But this is the second time he has to watch that happen. Now, one of the funny things about this is that it's easy to look at Tom Taylor's writing and see him as a guy who's really just kind of writing off Superman as like incompetent, right? Or a guy who just can't really do anything effective in this universe because he sucks. But that's not really the case. The truth about it is you kind of have to look at the actions of Superman both in a micro and in a macro sense. When it comes to like Superman operating in a micro sense, he's in Metropolis, and sometimes there's foes around the world that he faces off against, and that's it. But when it comes to Superman operating on a macro level, right, on a great big huge larger level, especially in a universal space, he can't be everywhere at once, and he can't save everybody all at once. Despite Superman almost appearing as this kind of larger than life figure, He's not. He's just a person who's got some powers and he's really capable and he does cool stuff sometimes, and that's it. And so it's one of those really cool ways to kind of bring his character down and remind us as the reader, this guy's not some unstoppable force. And watching a world perish when he feels like he could have done something to save them, it hits him all the harder. Not only that, you've also got Kyle Rayner who's struggling here, right? Now remember, Kyle Rayner is one of the 4 Green Lanterns of Earth. You've got Kyle Rayner, Guy Gardner, Hal Jordan, and John Stewart. John Stewart and Kilowog are dead, right? They're out. So literally, like, Kyle Rayner is watching the people that he calls friends perish right in front of his eyes. And so it's really just one of these instances where this destruction of this world happened at such a time to where it strikes a massive moral blow at the superhero community. But here's the beauty of Superman, right? Superman is pissed. This guy is incensed. And in fact, despite the fact that they're seemingly so far away from each other, both he and Darkseid lock eyes on each other. And for a moment, Superman is ready to race off and face off against Darkseid directly. But if he did that, he would fail. There'd be no way for him to come out on top of that fight. Assuming that it's just him and Darkseid, it's literally Darkseid empowered by a yellow lantern ring. He's a member of the Sinestro Corps. That doubles the amount of power that he normally has. He would absolutely crush Superman. Now, when you add in the fact that members of the undead army include Supergirl, Kara Zor-El, who's more powerful than Superman is, and all these other different individuals out there, all of whom have different varying levels of power, sometimes comparable to Superman, sometimes a little less powerful. In the case of Mr. Mxyzptlk, even more powerful. No way this guy would win. It would literally be a fool's errand. It's a suicide run. And so he does the next best thing. He literally takes all that anger, he channels it inward, he tells Kyle, it's not lost. We can still do something. He turns it into hope. And that's the power of Superman. The power of Superman is that all the anger and the rage that we as people would normally feel, and we would spew that anger and rage out into the world on Twitter or Reddit or something like that, and do nothing to make the world better, Superman does the opposite. Superman's response is like, yes, I'm full of anger and I'm full of grief and I'm full of sadness, but I'm going to channel that into something productive, right? I'm going to do something good with it. And then he goes out and does that. And so again, it's one of the small differences and really kind of the hallmark of what makes Superman Superman. And so following that, we switch over to Mr. Mxyzptlk and the Spectre. Now this is a fight for the ages, right? This is a massive battle. A really good example of this, if you're familiar with Marvel Comics, it would be like Protege versus the Living Tribunal, right? Protege has the power to copy the powers of anyone he sees, and there's no limit to the level of power that he can copy. So much so that he became as powerful as the Living Tribunal. It's like these two guys facing off against each other. You can only imagine the level of power that's being displayed here. Like quite literally, they're creating black holes, they're tearing at the very fabric of space. The impact of their punches is enough to shatter the planets around them, right? Like suns are going supernova. It's crazy how intense this battle is. Now, the Green Lanterns, try as they might, fire off their Green Lantern rings. They try to restrain Mr. Mxyzptlk. He kills every last one of them. And by all standards of measurement, this is a losing battle, right? It is a losing fight. The average person cannot possibly stand a chance to even hold their own in a battle between these two titans. So it really just comes down to Mr. Mxyzptlk and the Spectre to see who ends up winning. But here's where everything goes south. Yet again, yes, you guys know how it is with Tom Taylor. Just when you think the heroes have a chance to win, things go belly up yet again. So Brainiac basically arrives here. Now, of course, Brainiac has historically been a Superman villain, but in this instance, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. The desire for self-preservation makes every survivor across the universe, whether they were former enemies or not, they're all allies now. They're all working together just to try to keep themselves alive and destroy the undead army. So Brainiac showing up here is, well, one, they've already met with him before, but two, him showing up here and arriving on Earth 2, which is kind of like the backup Earth, the second Earth after the first Earth fell, that it is a way for them to kind of marshal and bolster their forces. The problem with this is that the arrival of Brainiac is met with the arrival of scot-free, right? Mr. Miracle, the guy who can break out of any prison anywhere. The issue with this is that he is traveling with a mother box, and as soon as Brainiac sees this, he's like, why did you bring that here? Because the mother boxes are all connected. He literally tells him it's a giant network. What you're doing here is ringing the dinner bell. You're telling everyone that we're here. It's like literally, as soon as the mother box pings, and the infected realize where they are. A boom tube opens and they all come pouring out, led by Highfather, right? The leader of the New Gods, one of the most powerful beings out there in DC, and yet another guy whose power, depending on the story, rivals or sometimes even exceeds that of Superman's. So now you have all these New Gods who are just pouring out onto Earth too, and they're attacking all the superheroes, right? Like, it seems like it's all going belly up. You've got their forces who are showing up on the scene. It's open season, right? It's a slaughterhouse. Humanity, like, you have like Batman and you have a few other people trying to get people out where they can, when they can, but one of the people that falls here is Leslie Tompkins. Now, I told you guys what was likely going to happen here, and Alfred does not become a Green Lantern, but I told you guys something was going to happen with Alfred, that Alfred was going to, in some capacity, be the main focus of the story, or just something nuts would take place with him. And so what ends up happening here is, remember, Alfred and Leslie Tompkins, they have a relationship together. They're in love, right? Like, it's like, for the first time in a long time, Leslie represents the possibility for Alfred being able to have a happier life. After having to kill Batman when he became infected, having to kill Nightwing and what was it, Tim Drake, having to kill him, when they all became infected, having to basically kill his sons, it tore him apart. But when Damian Wayne survived and became the new Batman, and Leslie Tompkins fell in love with Alfred and Alfred fell in love with her, it was a shot at happiness. And now that shot's been ripped away. Now it's been pulled away from Alfred. So literally what ends up happening here is we transition back over to the fight between Mxyzptlk and the Spectre. And so literally what ends up going on here is Superman realizing all the Spectre needs is an opening. That's all the Spectre needs, is the ability to just get a shot in that can destroy Mxyzptlk. Superman hits Mr. Mxyzptlk head on. Not enough to destroy him, but it's enough to distract him. And with that opening, the Spectre stabs Mr. M through the heart, right? Mr. Mxyzptlk, he stabs him through the heart, but Mxyzptlk in turn reaches into the heart of the Spectre and rips out Jim Corrigan. Now, Jim Corrigan is the host, because remember, when it comes to the Spectre, he's just the embodiment of God's vengeance or God's wrath, depending on what comic and what reality the comic is taking place in. But the important thing here is, if the Spectre is not bonded to a host, he just kind of floats out there into the ether, and that's basically it. The Spectre has to have somebody to be attached to in order to be able to act and in order to be able to do anything. There have been stories in DC Comics where the Spectre is able to act without a host, but that's not the norm. And Tom Taylor's kind of following the traditional standard of DC, which is the Spectre needs a host to do something. And so as Jim Corrigan literally lay dying just out there in space, that the Spectre, having no host whatsoever, Alfred has to like watch on as Leslie Tompkins dies. And then in turn, you basically have Highfather who steps in, and Highfather shows up on the scene. Damian Wayne jumps in to do what he can where he can as Batman, but he's no match for Highfather. All they're really doing is buying time here. The reality is that Highfather will kill them all. He will eradicate every single person here. They're all going to die. And in fact, when Highfather hits Damian Wayne, Alfred steps in and just lets out this unrelenting scream. Now, here's the thing, right? This whole thing's told from the perspective of Alfred. He says, I didn't even realize I'd moved. All I knew was there was a scream I contained when that little boy lost his parents in an alley so long ago. A scream I held in as I ended the lives of 3 men I loved. A scream of defiance, of grief, but mostly of fury. And in that moment, I heard an echo of my anger across the cosmos. There was a harmony of rage, and Alfred becomes the new host for the Spectre. Literally, Alfred becomes Spectre, and it is dope, because as soon as that happens, the first thing Alfred does, he kills Highfather on the spot. And if Alfred can kill Highfather, Alfred can kill Darkseid, and Alfred could quite literally turn the tide of the war. What's going on, guys? This is Rob. We're back with DCeased, and oh my god, I can't wait to see how you guys feel about the ending of this story. It's amazing, right? The ending of this is just, oh my god, I'm so excited for this. So, as you guys know, with DCeased, right, to get you guys caught up on everything, because these issues come out once a month, so it's been a little while since we did the most recent one. So as always, you'll find a link to the DCeased playlist down in the description in case you want to get caught up, but we'll also make a full story video on the whole DCeased event from beginning to end once this whole thing wraps up. But keeping in mind, what's happened so far is that you basically have the forces of all those who are infected by anti-life. They're basically zombies, right? By all standards of measurement, they're effectively zombies, and they're led by Darkseid, and they're literally cutting like a swath through the universe, and they're making their way towards Earth 2, which is like the second version of Earth. It's basically the new Earth that all the different characters of the survivors basically live on. And this battle's been raging on for a little while, right? Like, it's been going for some time. Now, at this moment, one of the things to remember is Lobo basically steps in. Now, for those of you guys who are unfamiliar with Lobo, he's amazing, but ridiculous at the same time. The idea behind Lobo is he was designed to be like a DC comic parody of Wolverine from Marvel Comics, right? They're like, Lobo's just ridiculous, he's over the top, he's nigh indestructible, right? It's almost impossible to hurt this guy, if not truly impossible. I mean, his healing factor's absurd. It's nuts, right? I mean, it's crazy what this guy's capable of. The important thing here, though, is that Lobo's a guy who is every bit on par with Superman in terms of power. And this guy showing up on the scene is a huge deal, because it's not enough to like turn the entirety of the battle in favor of the superheroes, but it is enough to help them stave off their own impending death a little bit longer. But as we know with DCeased, this is as much an analysis of the nature of superheroes as it is just like an end of the universe type of event. And so what you end up getting here is, of course, Big Barda and Scott Free, right? Mr. Miracle. If you're not familiar with them, they're not overly important. The big thing about this, though, with their characters is that they were initially infected. A cure has since been developed, but the cure is on the old Earth. It's not on the new Earth. And so the result is that they don't have the ability to easily cure people in this area. More so than that, while Big Barda and Scott Free were cured, their son Jacob has not been cured. And in fact, he's infected now. And this is where the kind of personality-driven element of the story comes into play, because one of the things that happens is while Alfred Pennyworth is basically narrating all of this stuff, one of the things he talks about is that he never really understood the kind of sacrifice that a parent would make for their child until he became a parent himself. Having like Bruce Wayne as kind of a surrogate son, right? Really his son by all standards of measurement, and that in experiencing what it meant to have kids of his own, he understands the sacrifice that a parent would make for their child. And so what he talks about here is that in this instance, Jacob, the son of Big Barda and Scott Free, attacks his parents because they can't bring themselves to kill their own child. Now, for Alfred himself, right, remember, he's basically imbued with the Spectre. Now, of course, the Spectre is basically the embodiment of God's wrath. It's one of the cool things to know about DC Comics is that, like, Judeo-Christianity, right, it does exist in DC. The God of Abraham, the Judeo-Christian God, does exist in DC Comics. He's called the Presence. But the thing about the Spectre is that he is as much a plot device as he is an essential character, right? Like, he's a guy who really just kind of shows up whenever he's needed, and sometimes his power is enough to just end the threat immediately. Other times it's not. He's like the living tribunal in Marvel Comics. Could he just wave his hand and end the problem? Sure, but like, because of whatever's going on, for some reason he can't. And in the case of Alfred, while, you know, despite the fact that he's imbued with all this astronomical power, there is a bit of inner turmoil going on here. The first is that as the embodiment of God's wrath or God's judgment, right, the role of the Spectre kind of changes, really even just within the confines of this story, it's kind of nuts, that his initial motivation is to just destroy everything. Right? I mean, it's really him fighting against the nature of the Spectre itself. That's what it does. It, like, you know, fire, brimstone. The Spectre's Old Testament, man. Like, he just does that kind of stuff. But Alfred himself, even filled with anger and rage towards those who were basically zombies, in the sense that it's because of them that he lost Bruce Wayne, and he lost Dick Grayson, and he lost Jason Todd, and the people who were close to him, right? Damian Wayne is the only survivor. That's why he's taken on the mantle of Batman, that in reality, Alfred just wants to annihilate everything. But it's kind of funny because in the midst of all this fight, right, this great big huge fight that's going on, Damian Wayne has been infected. And so seemingly it's only a matter of time before Damian succumbs to the virus. Now, how fast people succumb to this is relative to the importance of the character, right? Like, if someone who doesn't matter is infected with the virus, they turn immediately. If it's somebody like Damian Wayne, it's, I'll hold on as best I can, you know, and he lasts just long enough to basically, you know, somehow find a way out of it or something along those lines. And so it's kind of cool here because what you end up having is Damian speaking directly to Alfred. And this is one of the huge things that Tom Taylor did with Damian's character, because when Damian was originally introduced in DC Comics, way back during Grant Morrison's Batman run, during the Batman and Sons story arc, that what we had was Damian who was trained by the League of Assassins, and he didn't really care. He would kill anybody for any crime. It didn't matter what it was, right? Like, those of you guys who remember the movie Batman Begins, when Liam Neeson's character was saying, like, we just need to kill anybody who commits crime, because the reality is that the criminal justice system basically allows those individuals who commit crimes to have a second chance, and violent criminals rely on that second chance to basically better their abilities to commit crimes without getting caught, that Damien was very much the same way. Damien was like, if you shoplift, you're dead, right? If you dive into a pool when you're not supposed to, you're dead, right? For those of you guys who recognize the TikTok meme, no diving. But like, it's that kind of a thing, right? Like Damien was just super hardcore. And in fact, in a lot of ways, it was Batman just having to reel Damien in. It was Batman having to teach him, you don't just kill anybody because they commit any kind of a crime. The reality here is sometimes you let the small fish go so they can lead us to the big fish, and other times, some crimes just don't matter, right? Like, I mean, a person shoplifted. It sucks for the person who owns the store, but in the grand scheme of all the crime that's committed in Gotham City, it doesn't really matter all that much. And so kind of reeling Damien in, and then at the same time, teaching Damien to kind of focus on humanity and to focus on the idea that people can become better, hence the reason why everybody deserves a second chance, that initially Damien didn't take to it, and he very much rejected it. What this story shows is the evolution of Damien over the years. Yes, it's an alternate reality story. No, it does not take place in the main DC universe, but the progression and nature of Damien is still the same. And so where Damien's talking to Alfred and saying, look, you can't just kill everybody, right? I know you want to, I know you desire to because of all the things that you lost. Everything that's been destroyed, everything that you care about, Alfred, has been totally destroyed. I know that you are angry, hence the reason why you are now the host of the Spectre, but you have to be better than that. You can't destroy everything. And even if you desire to, hold off on doing that for me. If you ever loved me and if you ever respected my memory and what the mantle of Batman stood for, do not go through and just kill everybody. Now that's an important distinction to understand here, because Alfred could do that. As the Spectre, right, he could literally go through and just annihilate everybody here, and it'd be very, very easy for him to do. And so this is one of those things where like it kind of allows the story to continue, but it focuses more on the nature of Alfred. Now for the most part, one of the things that goes on here is that Alfred starts to realize there's something much bigger afoot. That yes, like Erebos, who's kind of like the main enemy that we haven't really seen yet, but basically the one that is the reason why this anti-life virus exists in the first place, right? So you can kind of call him the creator of the virus, not really patient zero, but the main catalyst behind all this, that Erebus starts to realize the nature of the heroes, that they won't stop fighting, that regardless of what happens, they will eventually find a way to win. And so in order to quell that, instead of having this kind of battle of attrition where Erebos is just kind of sending his forces in over time, he sends them all in at once. Just this overwhelming force. And it's a really smart move to make, because normally you could go with a battle of attrition, right? You could just have a virtually endless wave of enemies that constantly come at you and just wear you down to the point that you can't necessarily fight. But because the nature of superheroes is that they are all effectively Mary Sue's, in the sense that it's like, well, against all odds, we'll somehow find a way. The best way to defeat them is to throw all your forces at them at once. Such a massive, overwhelming force that there's seemingly no way to win. So not only does Darkseid and all his forces arrive on the scene, Supergirl, the whole 9 yards, right? Because she's infected, right? So the other thing that happens is Warworld follows suit. Now, Warworld is a huge deal. For those of you guys who don't know, think of Warworld in DC Comics as very similar to like the Death Star from Star Wars, right? One, it is an actual world where people just fight in gladiatorial combat, right? That's one of the big things about it. But the other part of Warworld is it is literally a destructive vessel, right? It can just fire off beams of light that will eradicate an entire planet, right? And that's literally what's going on here, that when Warworld shows up, that Alfred actually takes off, right? He literally leaves, and he says like, I'm needed elsewhere, right? There's somewhere else that I need to be, and that leads to Jonathan Kent, the son of Superman, stepping in. Now remember, Superman himself is off on the other side of the universe with the Green Lanterns. They split their forces in half. One half was to go save a world that was being attacked by Darkseid, lest that world's population end up being turned, and Darkseid's forces bolster by like 16 billion with a B, a massive number. And so splitting those numbers in half, you only have really half the superheroes that are available fighting here. And so Jonathan stepping in, one of the cool things about his character is much like Damien's evolution between being the just murderous son of Batman to becoming an actual superhero. Jonathan wasn't really murderous, but he struggled with confidence. He lived under his father's shadow, right? He's the son of Superman. And that in the DC universe, all these superheroes out there model themselves in some capacity after Superman. He's like the guy, right? And so like when you're the son of Superman, you're in the shadow of presumably the greatest superhero to ever live. And so Jonathan's evolution as a character was breaking out from under his father's shadow and becoming his own man. And one of the ways in which he does this is facing off directly against Darkseid. Now, can Jonathan defeat Darkseid while Darkseid's empowered by the anti-life virus as well as a yellow lantern ring, which basically allows him to feed on fear and bolster his power? No, Jonathan cannot win under that circumstance. One, he's not powerful enough, and two, Darkseid is far more capable, far more knowledgeable, and a lot more experienced in combat than Jonathan is. And so Brainiac ultimately steps in, right? Brainiac being like, well, technically he's the 9th level intelligence, but a major supervillain. And so the result of this is that because Brainiac is by all standards of measurement a living computer, that Darkseid infects Brainiac with the anti-life virus, which in turn leads to Brainiac taking off to his own ship. Now, the reason why Brainiac does this ties directly into the nature of Brainiac. Remember, one of the big things about his character is that over the years, throughout his entire publication history in DC Comics, this guy travels from one planet to the next, basically conquering and destroying it. But whenever he does, he steals a singular city from that planet, shrinks it down in order to preserve the knowledge of that planet and by extension expand his own knowledge, and then he literally just kind of keeps it as a sort of trophy. And there are hundreds, if not thousands of these cities because of the amount of time that Brainiac has spent traveling the spaceways and conquering worlds. And so when he shows up here, that what Brainiac starts doing is actually just, starts destroying each one of these cities. But then Cyborg shows up. Now, under normal circumstances, Victor Stone is about as useless as tits on a boar hog. This guy doesn't do anything, right? He serves no useful purpose. But in this story, he does, and it's a pretty epic one. So because of the fact that Brainiac is a living computer and Cyborg is quite literally one half human and one half machine, that where Erebus, in control of Brainiac, tries to infiltrate Cyborg, Cyborg realizes Erebus can't do that. Cyborg himself is immune to the anti-life virus. Now, we've known that since the beginning, but we didn't know the extent of it. And so what this means is that with Cyborg being impenetrable, right, somebody that Erebus literally can't get a hold of, that what Cyborg does is he seizes control of Brainiac's prime systems, if you want to call it that, and absorbs Brainiac's consciousness into himself. Quite literally, Cyborg merges with Brainiac. And what it does is it not only boosts the intelligence of Cyborg, giving him a much more intuitive understanding of exactly what he needs to do in order for the superheroes to win, but it also grants him all the knowledge of Brainiac himself. And that's when he comes up with an idea. And he literally travels back to all the superheroes and he's like, Lois Lane. And she's like, yes. And he's like, where's Kandor? And as soon as I saw that, I was like, oh my God, right? Like, oh my God. Because I totally forgot about Kandor. It never occurred to me to think about Kandor. Now, we'll talk about why that matters here in a second, but jumping back over to Jonathan Kent and his fight with Darkseid, he's able to hold his own to a degree. But what happens is something else catches his attention. And what he does is he races away from the fight and he flies to Warworld. And the reason why is because he realizes Warworld is powering up its cannon. And Warworld is intending to annihilate the entirety of the planet Earth in one fell swoop. It's a genius move, right? Send in all the soldiers, right? Send in like all the foot soldiers so that all the superheroes are distracted in fighting them. And in that distraction, use your primary weapon to take everybody out. Are some of your soldiers gonna die? Sure, but if your goal is to win by any means necessary, then of what relevance are soldiers that you see as easily replaceable? It's diabolical, but it would work. And so what's so crazy about this is that Jonathan is able to hold off the blast of Warworld, right? Saving the Earth. But as he falls back to the planet, thousands of Kryptonians are making their way into the battle. Now here's the reason why, and this is where this is where it all gets nuts, right? This is where it all gets crazy. Remember, Kandor was a city on Krypton that Brainiac stole before Krypton's destruction. Like literally, Kryptonians need to be exposed to a yellow sun in order for their powers to thrive. And so what happened is that literally because of Cyborg, the various Kryptonians in the bottled city of Kandor were freed from their captivity and returned to their normal size. So now all these Kryptonians, you basically have thousands of Superman just flying around, right? Superman and Superwomen. This changes the nature of the battle entirely. But here's the thing, man, there's still this amazing moment that happens, right? There's still this amazing moment that comes up, right? So like Superman arrives back on the scene, right? Like him and all the other forces are basically back in the battle now. Superman, of course, rescues his son, which is really, really cool. And then Alfred returns with the cure that he took from like Earth, right? Like literally brought just these huge shipping containers full of the cure and flew it to the other side of space in order to basically cure all those who were infected on Earth too. And And so, of course, Damian Wayne is one of the people who's cured here, but the other person that's cured is Darkseid. Literally, it's one of the coolest things, right? So like you literally have like, you've got Mary Marvel, right? From like Shazam's sister, basically. She's like holding down Darkseid, Jonathan Kent's holding down Darkseid, and then like Lobo comes up and just like grabs one of the cure vials and like smashes it in the mouth of Darkseid and cures Darkseid. So then Darkseid returns to normal, right? And then he's like, what's happened? And he's basically told by like Alfred and Superman, you were basically infected with the anti-life virus. You were being used as a pawn. Now, Alfred immediately wants to destroy Darkseid, right? He wants to eradicate him. But the response of Superman is, no, we cannot kill Darkseid. One, Darkseid by himself is more than enough for any one of us here. Darkseid, imbued with the power of a Sinestro Core ring, a Yellow Lantern ring, amplifies his power even further, right? Like, Darkseid is incensed that Erebus had used him as a pawn in a campaign to conquer the universe. So what does Darkseid do? Darkseid joins the superheroes and turns against Erebus. And that's the thing, man. Erebus has no idea what's coming, right? It's like that guy said to John Lithgow in that movie Ricochet. You didn't beat him, you just pissed him off, and now you're because now he's gonna be out for blood. So Batman's son just created a whole universe, and it's amazing. Check this out. So this is the conclusion for DCeased War of the Undead Gods. Just one of the best stories that DC Comics has released in the last like 5 years. It's absolutely phenomenal. So for those of you guys who are catching up with us, at this point at the end, it's now time to go to war with Erebus. Now, I will make sense of everything that's going on in case you're joining us for the very first time. But again, this is fantastic because with everybody having previously succumbed to the anti-life virus, which is really this story's stand-in for a zombie virus, if we want to call it what it is, that you have all these people that are basically snapping back, right? They're all basically coming back to normal. But here's the kicker. Remember, Erebus is the one behind all of this, which is to say the anti-life virus originated with him. It was Darkseid at the very beginning of the story of DCeased itself, basically tapping into the power of Erebus without really understanding what it was that he was doing. To put this in more practical terms, what Darkseid did is he took a drop of ink and he put it in a glass of water. It just changed everything, right? That's literally what he did. That drop of ink, of course, being the power or the influence of Erebus to basically affect and destroy this whole really the whole universe, to be honest, because everybody across the universe was infected here. But of course, with like Supergirl Kara Zor-El coming back, this is one of the cooler moments, because remember, in the DC story, when she was shot to Earth, she didn't actually go to Earth like she does in the main DC universe. Instead, she went to the realm of the New Gods and was immediately attacked and turned into a zombie. And so that's why here, when she initially comes across Superman, her initial response is, no, there's no way you're Superman. Kal-El is a baby, because up to this point, she never met him, right? Remember, Supergirl comes from Argo City. It was one of the last surviving cities when Krypton was destroyed. But Superman was a baby by the time Krypton died. So of course, given time dilation and aging differences and so on and so forth, that's why he's basically aged up here. So for her, it's coming across someone from Krypton who survived outside of herself, but not the person that she recalls. Now, the bigger takeaway from this, and this is one of the bigger things that goes on here, there's two massive shifts that go on. The first is that Darkseid joins the heroes. Now, one of the reasons why this happens, even though Darkseid won't readily admit it, is because he needs the heroes, right? And in fact, Darkseid's gonna have this amazing moment here in a little while, but like he needs the heroes, right? So it's kind of like there's no way for him to defeat Erebos on his own. But the other thing that goes on here is the Black Racer joins in. Now remember, the Black Racer is one of the many aspects of death that exists in DC Comics. And so having all these heavy hitters on their sides, these are some of the most powerful beings to ever exist in DC Comics. What's so funny is that the solution for everything comes from Damian Wayne, the son of Batman. Now, of course, Bruce Wayne, for those of you guys who are just joining us, he died at the very beginning of DCeased. Bruce Wayne, Dick Grayson, Tim Drake, they're all dead, right? Damian Wayne is the only real surviving member of the immediate Bat family, which is to say, basically like anybody who played the role of Robin. He's the only surviving person, but he ends up meeting with the Black Racer, and he says, my father and my brothers taught me to respect all life, but before I was Batman, before I was Robin, I was an assassin. I was raised to look for weaknesses. Now, what he's talking about here for all the new folks is, remember, during Grant Morrison's Batman run, Damian Wayne was initially introduced as basically being the son of Batman that he never knew about, that through some pretty shady stuff Talia al Ghul gave birth to Damian, and then Damian, being trained by Talia al Ghul and her ilk, was just dropped up on the doorstep of Batman and was like, now he's yours to raise. So Bruce Wayne had to teach Damian that he can't just kill anybody who commits a crime. It was a great story. It's called Batman and Son. It was a great story. Grant Morrison's run on Batman is phenomenal, and we'll probably cover it, right, beyond what we've done already. But it was a great story. The bigger thing here, though, is that when Damian talks about this, he was an assassin. But that's when he says, I've been thinking about how to take the fight to the source. Erebos is a primordial deity. It's the personification of darkness. The only thing that can destroy the dark is light. Erebos is anti-life, and I have an idea. I want you to tell me if it will work. I want you to confirm this, and I can end this being. I'd like your help to do so. And so this is an important distinction to understand. Erebos is about as close as DC Comics gets to what is, by all standards of measurement, a cosmic entity in Marvel Comics, right? A primordial being, a being that's been around since the beginning of everything in existence and represents a particular concept. But of course, following this, Damian goes to meet with Cyborg, and they have this bit of a conversation, right? Damian Wayne kind of spills the beans to Cyborg in terms of what his plan is, and then they call together all the surviving superheroes and supervillains. Because remember, in this conflict, there are no heroes and villains anymore, right? There's not really like the good guys fighting the bad guys or anything along those lines. It's just the survivors and the dead. And so with this great big huge conversation that goes on, what they realize is that in order to access Erebos, they have to go through what's called a doom tube. The problem with this is the only way to pass through a doom tube is to be dead. And so in order to pull that off, what they're going to do is literally die, right? They're going to basically have their hearts shut down. And that in the moment when they've passed, they're going to move through the Doom Tube and then arrive at Erebos. And to do that, they're going to bring War World. Now, this is cool, right? Because War World, historically speaking, in DC Comics, has just quite literally been exactly what it sounds like, a war-torn world. It's ran by Mongol. It's basically a place where you have like endless gladiatorial fights. It's an amazing concept, right? It's a really, really cool concept in DC. Now, of course, Darkseid chimes in and goes as far as to say, like, Darkseid will face Erebos, right? Of course, you know, then Guy Gardner chimes in, and Guy Gardner basically gets smacked around a bit for his troubles. The other part of this, though, is they reveal that in order to gain the attention of Erebos, they need forces powerful enough to effectively distract him. And so where Darkseid's on board, they even turn to the god of war, Ares. Now, of course, Ares, ever one of the more interesting characters in DC Comics, and for reasons that I'll never fully understand. Tom Taylor loves this guy. Like, every story he does has the god of war, Ares, in some capacity. He loves this dude, and I don't blame him, right? Under any normal circumstance, Ares is a hoss. Like, this guy is an absolute, he's literally the god of war. Like, he's just one of the coolest characters in DC. But despite all the power that he has, he just tells them point blank, I'm not going in there to fight Erebos. That's a suicide mission. Like, I'm not going in there to do that. I'm just going to stand back and watch. And that's when Cassie Sandsmark chimes in and calls him a coward. Right? She literally calls Ares, the god of war, a coward to his face. Right? She was like, there's a battle to be fought, and your plan is to hide from it. Right? And where his response is Ares does not hide, the response of Lois, right, stepping in, Lois Lane, right, she steps in, she's like, really? Where were you when my son was standing between this planet and annihilation, right? And even the Black Racers chimes in and says, if you face Erebos tomorrow, old god, you will not be alone. I will be beside you. Death has always followed war. And so it's really kind of cornering Ares, the god of war, and basically making him fulfill his role. So ultimately he ends up joining in, right? It's kind of like, okay, fine, look, I'll do it then, right? Like, I'll go ahead and do this thing. Now, what also complicates things a little bit is that during the time when DCeased was happening, you actually saw alliances and even romances forming where they normally never would have. One of the romances that formed was between Damian Wayne and Cassie, which, if I'm being honest with you guys, I kind of hope this becomes a main DC Universe thing. I don't actually know if that's going on right now. I'm not current with the Robin series and Damian Wayne, so if you know, leave a comment down below and let me know. But I kind of want to see, like, Damian Wayne and Cassie Sandsmark get together, right? Like Wonder Woman. I want to see them, like, get together because they just make a great couple, because, like, they're both just so headstrong and so independent, and it's just really awesome to see it play out. The problem with this is that Damian actually tries to convince her to stay behind and saying that, like, what we're going to have here is we're going to have have a situation where all these Kryptonians that had previously been confined to the bottled city of Kandor, right, have now been freed as a result of DCeased. They need to be trained, they need to be taught how to fight, all that kind of stuff. They need you to organize and structure them and teach them battle formations. He's kind of trying to keep her there. He's kind of trying to keep her away from the main conflict as a whole. Not in so many words. I mean, she even goes as far as to say, if you're trying to spare me from what's going on, he says, spare you, you're Wonder Woman. I'm asking the greatest warrior I know to protect the entire universe. And her response is, really, what's the weapon, Damian? This thing you and Cyborg have come up with. And where he won't tell her, she says, and conveniently, I won't be with you to see it. And that's where he kind of plays this role. And he was like, do you really believe that I don't want you beside me? I really, really do. But you need to be here to basically teach people how to fight. The superhero numbers have been drastically reduced, so on and so forth. He's trying to keep her there. Now, he's doing it out of love and he's doing it out of concern. But again, Cassie's one of the most amazing female characters in DC. She's pissed because she wants to fight. She wants to be there in this battle and be a part of it. She doesn't want to be kept. And so it's one of the coolest things about her character. I love the role that Cassie Sandsmark plays here. And Tom Taylor does a great job writing her, right? Then, of course, you get this really, really cool moment, right? Because again, this is all kind of leading up to this big thing. You have this cool moment where Jonathan Kent meets with Damian, only for us to find out that it's Damian's birthday. And so where Jonathan says, if you're really going to go through with this plan with like the whole life force and all that kind of stuff, and you're leading the charge, then you need to represent life, right? So what he does is he gives him a new Batman suit that is totally draped in white, and it looks dope. Like, we'll see what it looks like when he's wearing it, because he looks amazing in an all-white bat suit. Oh my God. Right now, here's the funny thing. Tom Taylor's not pulling this out of nowhere. Jeff Johns did this during his Green Lantern run. There was a point where Batman became the White Lantern, which is basically like, initially started with Kyle Rayner, and Kyle Rayner became Space Jesus. But like, being a White Lantern is what happens when you master all the other Lantern rings, and then just kind of usher yourself into a higher level of power. Now for Damian, he hasn't achieved that level of power. It's really more just a ceremonial garb, if we're being honest with ourselves, right? That's really more what this represents. But he's kind of wearing this outfit as a representation of the life force itself. So like the good versus the evil, light versus dark, that kind of thing. And so once they're all basically kind of tied into Warworld, and then they in turn shut down all their hearts and enter through the Doom Tube and into the realm of Erebus, we get what is quite likely one of the most amazing depictions of a character in the history of DC Comics. I love the way this guy looks, right? I just love the way this guy appears. He looks absolutely awesome. And so when you have Ares and you have the Black Racer who appear before Erebos, he pays attention to them, right? And he says, Ares and the Black Racer, such little things. When there is no one left to fight a war, when there's nothing living to die, there will still be darkness. I gotta say, man, it's one of the most intimidating statements that I think I've seen like a godlike primordial being make in comics. It's dope. And so they immediately go on the attack. Now, what's funny about this is Tom Taylor kind of leans into the idea that they're basically ants throwing little sticks at a human being, that it doesn't make any difference at all, right? Like Oliver Queen's got like the arrow of Apollo along with a bow, right? You have like the heroes who are launching an attack against Erebos, but they're literally tearing him open, right? Like cutting a hole in him. But that's kind of the benefit. While Tom Taylor leans into it and almost makes it appear a little comedic, right? In the sense that it's like, what are they really going to do against this guy? That's the overall point. The fact that he wouldn't pay any attention to them because he considers them so insignificant, that's their weapon. That's their benefit. Because cutting him open and then forcing Warworld inside, that's when everything changes. Because what happens here is that Cyborg, tapping into his own memories, right? Like accessing his own systems to ensure the plan goes through, realizes the life force is no longer in him again. Remember, the life force was instilled inside Cyborg, which is how they were able to synthesize a cure for the anti-life virus in the first place and make everybody normal again. But what Damian Wayne realized is that at some point in the past, that Bruce Wayne, his father, he says he was a paranoid man, and you were bonded to apocalyptic technology, right? Bruce didn't just hide a tracker in Cyborg, he hacked Cyborg's entire system years ago and left control with Damian. And so Damian says, I had a theory. The anti-life virus leapt out of your mind, I need the opposite, and I found it in you. I found the life equation. I extracted it and I erased it from all of your system. Now it only exists in me. This is a sacrifice. It's what Damian Wayne is doing. He's literally taken the life equation from Cyborg, imbued it with himself with the intention of entering into Erebos through Warworld, and then in turn detonating and wiping out Erebos, but at the same time, basically creating a whole new universe in the process. It's amazing. Like, it's one of the most crazy things to happen with Damian. And so where Cyborg realizes there's no way to stop him, and Damian basically teleports out before Cyborg can do anything, in turn, Cyborg joins the rest of the forces. And when they ask him, where's Damian at? His response is, Damian isn't coming. Now, initially, Darkseid believes that, like, the weapon failed. And if it did, they've got minutes to get out of this entire realm of Erebos before they're either destroyed by him or converted into dead beings as a result of just being in his realm. But the response here of Cyborg is, no, the weapon did not falter. The weapon is Damian. He's taken the life equation into himself. He intends to travel there and then basically destroy Erebus in the process. And so Damian does have a few kind of momentary goodbyes, specifically talking to Oliver Queen. Not the most important thing, but it is a bit of a cool moment here because in turn, Ares, the god of war, is seemingly destroyed. And then when Damian teleports inside of Erebus, Erebos starts talking to him, right? He refers to him as mortal, and then he says, like, Erebos, I was wondering when I'd hear from you. And Erebos responds, this will destroy you too. And the response of Damian is, not really, I'll just become something else. And so where Erebos says, I'm willing to bargain, the response of Damian is, for your existence? No. You took my father, you took my brothers, you hurt my friends, and you took so much from our world, from our universe. And when Erebos asks, what do you want from me? The response of Damian is the most Damian Wayne response ever. He says, nothing. You pissed me off. There will be no bargain. This will just be your end. And it's the most Damian Wayne thing ever. Now, here's what's so cool about this, right? The sacrifice of Damian Wayne here only really has significance to you if you're familiar with the history of his character in DC. If you're not really familiar with the history and the story of Damian, to a degree it's kind of lost on you. But Damian, in a lot of ways, just killed. He was death incarnate. He would kill indiscriminately. In fact, one of the first stories where he appeared, he killed a guy who was a thief. He cut his head off because any and all crimes need to be paid for with death, right? A person has to die for any crime that they commit. So to be a person raised with such an extreme view, right? Such a black and white and binary view of life and death, crime and punishment, coming to a person or becoming a person that's willing to sacrifice their life to save a universe is a complete and total 180 for his character. And so what makes this really cool is Jonathan Kent steps in. Right now, this story, we can largely kind of assume the history between Jonathan and Damian is very much the same, even during their younger years, right? The Super Sons, the teenage superhero team, or at least the young kid superhero team, which, by the way, if you never read Super Sons, one of the most fun stories ever in the history of DC Comics. It was amazing. It was so fun. It was a blast. But what they realize is there's no way for them to extract Damian alive. It's not going to happen. In order for Erebus to die, Damian has to die as well. So Jonathan chooses to stay behind. Now his father won't let him, right? Like Superman does not want Jonathan to stay there. But the response of Alfred as the Spectre is, I will get him out, Clark, right? I will extract Jonathan in time for him to survive the destruction of this universe. But it's just this amazing moment where literally Alfred and Jonathan and Damian are just sitting together. The three of them are just together and just talking. And it's an incredibly beautiful moment because Jonathan and Damian are best friends, and that Damian is the last son that Alfred really has, right? Like, he viewed Batman as a son, he viewed Damian as a son or potentially a grandson, but he was basically family. And so with the death of Damian, Alfred will officially lose the last remaining member of his family, but they have to let him do it. They have to let him make this sacrifice. It's so beautiful the way it was done, because Damian says, if I told you what I was doing, you never would have let me go through with it. And the response of Jonathan is, no, I wouldn't. I was right. You were a great Batman. And the response of Damian is, thank you, John, and then he explodes, right? He detonates. And so when Erebos is basically killed in this massive explosion, Alfred gets Jonathan out of there. They get through a portal, right? They get back to the real world itself. And then in turn, Alfred has this kind of inner monologue where he says, I visit sometimes the cosmos Damien made. I glide past its new suns and I walk over its cooling planets. I had no idea how much a parent would sacrifice for a child. Not until I had my own did I understand what I would give up for them, what I would do if any harm came to them, how deeply I could miss them. My bats, my sons, my whole universe. It is this just beautiful ending to what is one of the darkest stories that DC did, but I loved it. Oh my God. So this is the end of DCeased, guys. This is the conclusion of the story. And I think it's probably one of the greatest stories DC's done. I wouldn't even say the last 5 years. I'd say the last 10 years. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments section. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.